Justin Chin,
Yes.
what item are you here for?
The Take 5 oil change.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to put you on mute till the public hearing starts.
Okay, I don't necessarily need to speak at the public hearing unless this. Yes?
Are you representing a vendor?
He's here for the Take 5 item, but we also have Keith Muhammad, who might be the one who's answering questions.
Okay, so who needs to be on, one or both?
You can go ahead and leave them both on, I guess.
Okay, thank you. Michael Garcia, what item are you here for? Okay, waiting room's empty.
Great. Good evening. Welcome to the City of Sugar Land City Council meeting for Tuesday, May the 5th, Cinco de Mayo. For everybody out there, I know it's a little bit different, but we're happy to be here with you today. We've got a pretty full agenda. So we're going to start first with the invocation from Miss Jennifer Lane, and then that'll be followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Jennifer.
Lord God Almighty, we have spent 60 years building the greatest city in the state of Texas. It's just the facts, y'all. As we walk through this moment of trial with people all around us with varying degrees of suffering and anguish, we are reminded we are one humanity. And among this beautiful humanity is a bright, shining star. You'll see it all over the city. It's got a crown in the middle of it. And when I see that city seal, I see a symbol of leadership and resilience. Lord, I ask you to continue to guide us with your Holy Spirit, that we make the best decisions for the residents, our workers, our business owners, our city employees, and the brave men and women on the front lines of our great city, as we pull through, as we always do, with flying colors. Amen.
Amen.
And now for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Jennifer. We've got a few recognitions tonight. The first is Christine Nguyen, the Food Network Spring Baking Championship, and I'm going to turn it over to Melissa Regiu, Tourism and Visitor Services Manager. Melissa.
Hi.
Hi, Melissa.
Thanks, Mayor. Hi, how are you?
We're doing great.
Great. So I am beyond thrilled to share how proud we are of Sugarland resident Christine Nguyen and owner of the Sweet Boutique's participation in the Food Network Spring Baking Championship. She was also among the top finalists of the group, and lastly, her Mochi donut creations have gained her local fame among foodies in the Houston area.
Hi, I'm nervous.
That's not a problem. Go ahead, Christine.
Hi, how are you?
We're doing wonderful. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. I am so honored to be here, and thank you for recognizing me today.
Would you like to say anything before we do read your recognition?
No, I'm just really so proud to be part of Sugarland and represent Sugarland on the show. It was always my dream to be on Food Network and say that I'm part of Sugarland and show people how sweet and kind people from Sugarland really are. So, yeah, that's all.
Well, congratulations. So for the public, Christine was selected as one of 11 competitors from across the nation on the Food Network Spring Baking Championship, which began airing on March 9th of this year. She competed against other talented bakers who were tested to create extraordinary jaw-dropping spring treats for a chance to be crowned Spring Baking Champion. And Christine, I hear that your Mochi donuts, did I pronounce that right?
It's Mochi.
Mochi donuts are the rave. So, you know, a shout out to you for the Mochi donuts. And let me read your certificate of recognition. This is presented to Christine Nguyen. Certificate of recognition is presented to Sugarland resident and owner of the Sweet Boutique Bakery, Christine Nguyen, in recognition of her selection as a competitor on the Food Network's Spring Baking Championship. Christine is a self-taught baker and is among the talented bakers that are competing for the championship. Over the course of 8 weeks, 8 weeks, folks, 11 bakers will be tested to create extraordinary spring treats for a chance to be crowned the Spring Baking Champion and winner of the $25,000 grand prize during the special episode on Monday, April the 27th. So I guess it's already over. We got to you a little bit late.
It's okay.
In addition to your exceptional baking abilities, Christine has won Best Dessert for Bites in Fort Bend County in 2019 and has baked cakes for celebrities, including Dwight Howard and Shaq O'Neal. Christine, congratulations to you on your many achievements, and I want to try those mochi donuts.
Yes, please come by and I'll have a box waiting for you.
You got a deal.
Yes, deal.
Congratulations, Christine.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thanks, Melissa. Next, we have our National Police Week. And we've actually got, we've got a proclamation and we have a video. So, which one are we going to do first? Eric, you're on. Eric, you there? Introduce the item for us, Eric. Okay.
Chief, you're up.
Okay, I got it. Let's go to the proclamation from the Office of the Mayor, National Police Week, May 10th through 16th, 2020. Whereas the Congress and President of the United States have designated May 10th through 16th, 2020 as National Police Week. And whereas the members of the Sugar Land Police Department play an essential role in safeguarding the rights and freedoms of the citizens of Sugar Land. And whereas it is important that all citizens know and understand the problems, duties, and responsibilities of their police department, and that members of the police department recognize their duty to serve the people by safeguarding life and property, protecting people against violence or disorder, and protecting the innocent against deception, oppression, or intimidation. And whereas the Sugar Land Police Department has grown to be a modern and scientific law enforcement agency, which increasingly provides a vital public service. And this is delivered by myself as mayor and our city council. Eric, we wanted to recognize all that both you do as the police chief, but all of our officers, the men and women that are on the ground, many of which I see every morning as I start my morning, and they're great people. So would you like to say something, Eric?
Yes, sir, Mayor. First and foremost, I just want to say thank you to you and council for your recognition. We do realize we are fortunate, and I'm just proud to be a part of this organization, but we're fortunate to be in a city of Sugar Land. It's just such a wonderful city with the relationships that we have with our community. But we cannot forget that there are officers who have paid the ultimate price. And just for example, we send our thoughts and prayers out to the Houston Police Department, who just lost an officer who was killed in a line of duty. So we recognize this is a very tough but noble profession, but we're grateful and we're honored to be a part of this city. But we want to continue to keep our officers safe. And we thank you guys for all your support and thank the community for their support as well.
Thanks for your leadership, Eric. And now we're going to direct our attention to a video.
Police Week is my time to reflect on the heroes I have lost during my career. I began my career almost 20 years ago at the Dallas Police Department. Just a weekend of field training, I was one of the first officers to arrive at the shooting of Dallas police officer Christopher Kevin James. Kevin was a seasoned officer whose life was needlessly taken as he tried to separate people who were fighting and had been kicked out of a club. Kevin left behind a family who cared deeply for him, as well as the family of his brothers and sisters in blue. A short while later, I moved to the Houston area and joined the Sugar Land Police Department. While on duty, I have had 2 occasions where tragedy almost struck my life. While working night shift, my patrol vehicle was struck by a drunk driver whom I was trying to stop. The second incident involved an armed bank robber trying to take my life. Fortunately, I did not pay the ultimate price in either situation. However, it is during this week that we pay tribute to those officers that have made the ultimate sacrifice. Although our goal is to reduce needless loss of lives, we understand that the numbers will never decrease to 0. We understand that there is a criminal element who is willing to harm people, and it is our job to protect our community, even if it means paying the ultimate sacrifice. In the United States in 2019, there were 307 fallen officers that will be memorialized on a National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial in Washington, D.C. In 2020 in Texas, there have already been 7 officers fallen. The most recent include Deputy Sheriff John Roden, Bell County Sheriff's Office, struck and killed by a motor vehicle. Also, Officer Justin Putman, San Marcos Police Department, shot by an armed suspect. The Sugar Land Police Department pays respect each year and remembers all of these officers as well as one of our own, Sugar Land Police Sergeant Ronald D. Slockett, taken from us on July 4th, 1987.
Eric, our thoughts and prayers go out to, I know, Houston City Councilman Mike Knox. His son was a pilot in the City of Houston Police Department helicopter that went down this weekend. Their son, he and his wife's son, was killed. The other officer is in extremely critical condition, so our thoughts and prayers go out to the City of Houston Police Department and Houston City Council Mayor Turner during this trying time for them.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Eric. And now we're going to recognize it's Public Service Recognition Week. And I'd like to read the proclamation. Public Service Recognition Week, May 3rd through 9th, 2020. Whereas Americans are served every single day by public servants at the federal, state, county, and city levels, and these unsung heroes do the work that keeps our nation working. And whereas public employees take not only jobs, but oaths. And many public servants, including military personnel, police officers, firefighters, border patrol officers, embassy employees, healthcare professionals, and others risk their lives every day in service to the people of the United States and around the world. And whereas public servants include engineers, doctors, and scientists, train conductors and astronauts, nurses and safety inspectors, laborers, computer technicians and social workers, and countless other occupations, and day in and day out provide diverse services demanded by the American people of their government with efficiency and integrity. Whereas without these servants at every level, continuity would be impossible in a democracy that regularly changes its leaders and its elected officials. And now I'd like to recognize Chandra Holmes, our Employee Engagement and Wellness Coordinator. Welcome, Chandra.
Hi, Mayor. How are you?
Good evening. Welcome.
I just wanted to just reiterate, now more than ever, we recognize the amazing work that our employees do on behalf of the city, and just want to tell everybody just to kind of join me in thanking employees and wishing them a happy Public Service Recognition Week.
All right. Thank you, Chandra. Absolutely. And now we have, we're going to direct your attention to a video.
This is the 36th year that America will celebrate Public Service Recognition Week, which is the first full week in May and has been since 1985. Public Service Recognition Week is a time set aside to honor the men and women that serve our nation as federal, state, county, and local government employees. Throughout the nation and the world, public servants use this occasion to educate others about the work they do and why they have chosen public service careers, as well as many ways government services make life better for all of us. Public service employees are doing important work and positively affects all of us every day. Our City of Sugar Land employees are on the front lines, ensuring the safety and security of our community and providing important services to our citizens, such as traffic management and safe streets and sidewalks, superior quality water, and enforcement of our codes and ordinances that keep our community one of America's best. Our public service deserve thanks for working diligently on our behalf. The city currently employs 800 employees. Public safety employees make up about 1/2 of the city's employees in the fire EMS, police, dispatch departments. The other half of our workforce includes employees in departments such as city administration, engineering, planning, public works, information technology, finance, human resources, permits and inspections, environmental and neighborhood services, city attorneys, city secretaries, performance and accountability, economic development, and Sugar Land Regional Airport. We hope you recognize our employees' hard work year-round. But especially during these unprecedented times, we hope you will join us in thanking our staff for their hard work.
Thank you, Chandra. Mike, to you and all of our staff, thank you for the sacrifices, and thank you for making our life better in Sugar Land.
Thank you, Mayor.
Yes, sir. And now we're going to go to National Public Works Week. We have with us our own Rob Valenzuela, Director of Public Works. Rob, are you there?
I am.
You want to introduce it for us?
You bet, Mayor. So every year we celebrate National Public Works Week the third week of May. This year, National Public Works Week falls on May 17th through the 23rd. Unfortunately, this year we're not able to gather like we typically do, so we went ahead and we created a video as well as a proclamation.
Wonderful, Rob. Let me read the proclamation. National Public Works Week, the rhythm of public works, May 17th through 23rd, 2020. The year 2020 marks the 60th annual National Public Works Week, sponsored by the American Public Works Association, and is celebrated by more than 30,000 members in the United States and Canada. This week is meant to inform and educate the public on the importance of public works to their daily lives, planning, building, managing, and operating at the heart of their local communities to improve everyday quality of life. And whereas public works professionals focus on infrastructure, facilities, and services that are of vital importance to sustainable and resilient communities and to the public health, quality of life, and well-being of the people of Sugar Land, and could not be provided without the dedicated efforts of public works professionals, and whereas engineers, managers, and employees at all levels of government and the private sector are responsible for rebuilding, improving, and protecting our nation's transportation, water supply, water treatment, and solid waste systems, public buildings, and other facilities essential for our citizens. And now I'd like to direct your attention to a video.
My name is Robert Valenzuela. I'm the Director of Public Works for the City of Sugar Land. Since 1960, the American Public Works Association has sponsored National Public Works Week. Across North America, more than 28,000 American Public Works Association members in the United States and Canada use this week to energize and educate the public on their contribution of public works to their daily lives. Each year, the National Public Works Week focuses on a theme. The 2020 National Public Works Week theme is the rhythm of public works. This year, National Public Works theme challenges our residents to think about their communities as a combination of essential services working in concert to create a great place to live. Every community has a rhythm, a heartbeat, that reflects its essence, its pace of life. Today, I want to recognize and thank the public works professionals who are that heartbeat, who help establish the rhythm for the city. Some great examples of this are the roles public works professionals play in emergency management, the operation and maintenance of the city's water and wastewater systems, the intelligent transportation system, the street and sidewalk network, and beautification of the city's right-of-way, which have become a signature element for the city of Sugar Land. I've often commented that the public works profession is a team sport. It requires our staff to build a consensus with other departments, private businesses, or organizations, sometimes with other cities or state agencies, and residents to achieve the desired outcomes. That being said, it also requires a very understanding and committed family. I want to thank them for their commitment and support, which allows their public works professional to provide this heartbeat, this rhythm that we call the Sugar Land Way.
Thank you, Rob, and I know City Council joins me in congratulating and honoring the Public Works Department and all the people that make that up, and I'll look forward to the next time we get to share kolaches together.
Thank you, Mayor.
Yes, sir. We're going to move now into the public comment period. This is actually intended for anyone that wants to speak on a particular agenda item that is not a public hearing. It's not an agenda item or a public hearing. Thomas, did we have anybody sign up for anything?
No, sir.
Okay. We didn't have anybody sign up, so we're going to go ahead and move on to 2, review the consent agenda. Item number 3, the consent agenda. Everything on this agenda is considered routine business. We'll take all the items as one action unless a council member wants to pull an item and have a separate presentation. Council members, got a motion by Gandhi. Do I have a second? Was that a second by Jacobson?
Yes, Mayor.
Got a second by Jacobson. If you'll vote at this time, please. And it's a 7-0 vote. Thank you, Council. Item number 4, public hearings. 4A. Receive and hear all persons desiring to be heard on the proposed guidelines and criteria governing tax abatement agreements in the city of Sugar Land to become effective on May 20th of 2020. We have with us our own Devin Rodriguez, Assistant Director of Economic Development. Devin, good evening.
Good evening, Mayor and Council members. Thank you very much. Yes, tonight I'm going to be covering the renewal of our guidelines and criteria for tax abatement. But I wanted to just take a moment and explain, why do we do tax abatements in Sugar Land? And the Sugar Land City Council has the option to offer companies property tax abatements to encourage economic development in the city of Sugar Land. The city does not lose any money through such value-added tax abatements, as the development would not have occurred without the tax abatement. The projects result in significant property tax value and revenue to the city after the abatement expires, which is a maximum of a 10-year term. And in addition, economic growth generated by these agreements fully benefit the local school districts because they do not participate in abatements. Our tax abatements in Sugar Land also follow our state guidelines, which this is one of those requirements of our state guidelines, is to make sure that we renew our local guidelines every 2 years. Next slide, please. For our guidelines and criteria, we are required to designate a reinvestment zone and enter into a tax abatement agreement. And as I mentioned, we're required to renew these guidelines every 2 years per the state statute. They were last adopted on May 15th, 2018. The guidelines that we are presenting tonight are the same strengthened provisions that were established in 2016. So we had strengthened guidelines in 2016. We renewed those in 2018, and we're asking to renew those again in 2020. Some of the strengthened provisions are increased minimum capital investment requirements with a tiered structure, and it also matches what our target industry list is for attracting businesses to Sugar Land. And then also outlines the reinvestment zone steps to help applicants kind of better understand what the process must happen in order for an abatement to be processed and approved. The guidelines tonight, they also are updated to include the new 30-day posting requirement, which is a new requirement in Chapter 312 when it was renewed earlier this year by the state legislature. And so we are recommending readoption of these existing guidelines with that one addition. Next slide, please. This is just a quick snapshot of what those minimum qualifications are. I mentioned that we have a tiered structure. Our minimum value, cumulative value, is $4 million to be added to the tax roll. And then we have a tiered structure from there. So if it's between 20 and 40 million, it's up to 55% abatement, 40 to 75 million, up to 75% abatement. It is all dependent on what the actual value is that is being added to the tax roll. Companies can get an additional abatement if they achieve certain LEED certification. Next slide, please. Some of the other factors that we consider in our tax abatement application is number of jobs created or retained, the amount of the local payroll, local sales taxes generated, and then anything that is additional that is being added in terms of personal property investment as part of that application. Next slide, please. This is the application process for a tax abatement. We receive a written application. Staff makes a recommendation to our City Council Economic Development Committee. Then the tax abatement recommendation is reviewed with the City Council. A reinvestment zone must then be created, and that must be approved by the City Council after 2 readings. we now have this new requirement, which is a 30-day posting of the agreement. So 30 days prior to the city council taking action, we must post the action that is upcoming of the review of the tax abatement agreement. And then finally, the tax abatement agreement must be approved by the city council. Next slide, please. I just wanted to give a quick snapshot of our existing program. We had we had 2 or 3 of our tax abatements roll off previously, but we have 8 active tax abatements in 2019. 7 met the requirements to receive the abatement, and that minimum required value to receive the abatement was 120 million, but the actual value that was registered on the CAD was 159 million. So even our projects are far exceeding the value, the minimum requirement that we set out originally for the tax abatement. And as mentioned previously, Fort Bend ISD benefits as a school district as the taxes are not abated. And in addition, the city does not abate inventory, and so we receive full value on inventory. And some of our tax abatement agreements actually have requirements for inventory value in order to receive an abatement on their real improvements. And so for 2019, we had 15 million value in inventory for 2 abated companies in 2019 that the city received full value for. Next slide, please. So finally, our recommendation is to approve resolution number 20-10 for adopting the guidelines and criteria for tax abatements in the city of Sugar Land. This action does require a public hearing, and if needed, any changes after the next 2 years can be permitted by state law, but it would require a 3/4 vote of the city council. Next slide, please. So with that, I will hand it over for the public hearing.
Thank you, Devin. At this time, what I'd like to ask council members to do is if they would hold their questions, and we're going to go ahead and open the public hearing and hear anybody that would like to comment on this. Thomas, do we have anybody in the queue, or have we heard from anybody?
Not for this item, Mayor.
Okay. So we have nobody that has weighed into this either by email or is waiting in the queue to comment. So I'd go ahead and we're going to move to consideration and action on City of Sugar Land Resolution number 2010, a resolution of the City Council of the City of Sugar Land, Texas, adopting guidelines and criteria governing tax abatement agreements in the City of Sugar Land under Chapter 312 of the Texas Tax Code to become effective on May 20th of 2020. And I'll open it up to the council members. Any questions, council members? Can I get a motion?
Motion to approve by Carroll.
I've got a motion by Councilmember McCutcheon. Do I have a second?
Second, Kermali.
Got a second by Kermali. If you vote at this time, please. And it passes 7-0. Thank you, Devin.
Thank you, Mayor.
Item number 4B, a public hearing to receive and hear all persons desiring to be heard on the proposed conditional use permit for the establishment of Take 5 oil change on approximately 0.828 acres located at the intersection of Highway 6 and Settlers Way Boulevard. And we have with us our own Laura Waller, our planning one. Laura. Hi, Laura.
Good evening.
There you go.
Yeah, glad to be here. Technology working and everything. So this evening, we're bringing for you a conditional use permit. This area is the small vacant site on the northwest corner of Settlers Way and Highway 6. It was the former Chevron gas station until about 2008. It was then torn down and has remained vacant ever since. The zoning is B2 or general business, and that does require a conditional use permit for small automotive repairs and such as the oil change facility. Next slide. So surrounding analysis, an aerial map of the area, it is as you can see, full of commercial activity. There are several shopping centers, both across the street and behind the proposed site. There's a shopping center, a Shell gas station across the street. There's a shopping center with restaurants that are behind it. There is a freestanding bank in the same parking lot. So a very mixed use kind of business area, full of commercial businesses. Next slide. So this site is included in a neighborhood activity center, or a NAC, as you might have heard it referred to when discussing the future land use plan. So the long-term vision for NAC is mixed-use walkable area that is achieved through future redevelopment of the area. When we were looking at this site, we did take into account the overall area, especially the fact that this site is surrounded by strip center style development. Because the oil change facility and the property is on the edge of a NAC, we did think that it was slightly, well, it was more appropriate for an oil change facility than another location, perhaps. The site is less than 1 acre, which does limit the ability to meet all the elements that we would typically require of a neighborhood activity center. It's not technically walkable from the connecting center because it is across the parking lot. It's right there on the edge of a major thoroughfare. So we do think that this is an appropriate use based on the current and future land use plan. Next slide. So the details of this site, it would be to construct about a 1,500 square foot oil change facility. There would be 3 oil change bays, as well as a small office and restroom and storage area. Oil change facilities are classified under auto repair and services minor, which does require a conditional use permit. And that conditional use permit process would determine necessary mitigation. So it can bring certainty of council to the physical layout with the site plan and elevations, as well as landscape and photometric to make sure that there is no spillover onto nearby neighboring sites. Next slide. So access to this facility would be off of Settlers Way, as well as interior parking lot, alleys. The existing entrance that is directly off of Highway 6 is proposed to be closed. So that would help reduce points of conflict that's near that pretty busy intersection with Settlers Way. There are room for 9 vehicles queued in bay-specific lines, as well as additional vehicles around the perimeter of the site. And existing landscaping is proposed to be supplemented. So they are adding 11 trees, filling up the perimeter with 100% hedge, and adding interior landscaping around the building itself. Next slide. The P&Z, the Planning and Zoning Commission, staff did present, and Keith Muhammad also spoke. He is the representative from Take 5. There were no speakers present during the public hearing that we held in January. And at the February 27th meeting, staff did share some questions and research on concerns that the Planning and Zoning Commission had. The commission was primarily concerned with directional signage, as well as the navigation of circulation in the site itself. So staff did look into some past CUPs for automotive-related businesses and added a proposed condition that the site would require directional signage to be posted. Not necessarily the locations or the specifics of what it would say, but just the requirement that there is internal directional signage. The commission then voted unanimously to recommend approval of the CUP with the conditions that staff recommended. Next slide. The public hearing qualifications were met. There was an online form available to the public. Property owners within 200 feet were sent mailers and notified. We did send out special information regarding the virtual meeting, that it would happen via Zoom. And we still have received no inquiries and is not aware of any comments or pending speakers to speak. We also have not heard of any opposition to this proposed conditional use permit. Next slide. So this is a Google Excerpt aerial little map of the site itself. So as you can see, it's a fairly empty green grass lot with quite a bit of landscaping around the edges. So about 98% of that landscaping is actually proposed to remain. And where you can see at the bottom of the screen, the Highway 6 stub is to be removed. They would extend the hedge line and as well as add several trees all along in that area to cover up where the driveway is coming out. They are realigning a cross access just a little bit in order to better align with the internal driveway. So one tree would have to be removed for that. But aside from that, the remaining cross accesses are to remain as well as the landscape. Next slide. So these are some photographs you can see across the lot. The photograph here on the right, that is taken from the Highway 6 stub looking back towards the strip center. So it is a fairly small site, but the building is also small, only about 1,500 square feet. So it's fairly limited and a small size lot that we're talking about. Next slide. A couple more images. The one on the left was taken from the main parking lot looking towards Settlers Way. And then again, looking from the Highway 6 stub towards that intersection, you can see it is very close, that driveway. So that is why it is proposed to be removed in order to eliminate conflict with the intersection there. Next slide. So this is the most updated site plan after P&Z comments have been addressed. So you can see there are 9 little cars drawn in there in the center of the site with the small building there located centrally. And then directional arrows to delineate the expected circulation based on directional signs that are required now by one of the recommendations. And you can also notice that it does close up the Highway 6 stub. So the site would be accessed from internal driveways with the parking lot, as well as one main driveway with Settlers Way itself. Next slide. So this is the circulation plan, again, just reinforcing how the traffic is proposed to be circulated inside the lot. Next slide. This is the landscape plan. So here in light gray, kind of in the background is everything that is existing. And then the dark items that you see are going to be additional supplemental things. So at the top where the cross access is being realigned, you can see some added vegetation on the right side, as well as one tree that will have to come out. On the top right corner, there's a hedge and some additional trees that are being put in place in order to more camouflage that dumpster screening. Then along the south where the cross access is, or the Highway 6 entrance is coming out, they are putting in a full double row hedge, as well as adding 4 large oak trees. And those would be of the 4-inch caliper as per standard CUP practice. And next slide. So elevations of the building itself, it'll be a full masonry building, very small with glass garage doors that would remain closed whenever the business is not in operation. And then there is, it's a full masonry on here, as well as the full masonry to match the dumpster screening. It would match the same building finishes. It would all be a masonry. Next slide. This is the photometric site. That's fairly standard. It does show that there are a couple of light poles as required, but there is not any significant spillover light along the perimeter. Next slide. So your main points for consideration tonight is that the site does have a history of auto-related businesses. It was previously a gas station that was annexed in 1989 and then removed in around 2007, 2008. It is currently zoned B2, so general business, which requires the CUP. There are not any shared property lines with single-family residential zoning. So that is one of the main concerns when thinking about auto-related businesses is the proximity to single-family homes, and this is quite a ways away from any of them. It's near property with uses of similar intensity, including several shopping centers, freestanding banks, gas stations, and the CUP does appear generally compatible with the existing uses. Staff does believe it is well suited to the location because it being on the corner of a state highway and a major collector. And council, again, may place any additional conditions on the CUP in addition to those that both staff and the Planning and Zoning Commission have recommended to ensure that the property is redeveloped in order to mitigate any negative impacts on the surrounding area. Next slide. So this is the list of recommended conditions. Several of them come from standard automotive related businesses, but of particular interest to this site would be that garage doors need to remain closed, limitation on vehicle size, so a 2-axle maximum, and that directional signage would be required for internal site circulation. Outside storage of vehicles and speaker systems are prohibited as per usual with CUPs. Next slide. Therefore, staff does recommend approval of the conditional use permit with the attached exhibits and conditions. And I would be happy to answer any questions after the public hearing. We also do have Keith Muhammad and Justin Chen, who are with the applicant representatives, who can also answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. At this time, we're going to move to the public hearing. We're going to open the public hearing. Thomas, have we received any comments, or do we have anybody in the queue?
No, sir, not for this item.
Okay. We haven't received any comments. We've got nobody waiting in the queue to comment. So at this time, I'm going to open it up to the council members. Do you guys have any questions, guys and gals? Himesh?
You're on mute. Himesh.
There you go.
Sorry.
You're in, Himesh.
Okay. Laura, there's still an entranceway off of Highway 6, though, correct? Even though you're closing the stub, there's an entrance on one of your maps that looked like still off
Yes.
of 6.
If you want to toggle to slide 38. So there is an entrance that is the shared entrance with the shopping center.
Right.
So Market at First Colony is the name of the shopping center. So that entrance is directly into the parking lot, and then you would have to enter the site itself from the shared parking lot.
But there's no concern that there would be any type of queuing or interference with that entrance?
Well, so we asked as part of the CUP that this entrance directly from Highway 6 to be closed because it does eliminate.
You're talking about the stub?
Yes, so that stub, we asked because they could have potentially just created a site and left the stub there. And so that would have a lot of conflict with the intersection. So eliminating that does eliminate the conflict with the intersection. However, because this driveway is already existing, we can't require that they close it.
Right, no, I understand that, but there's no concern that it's going to cause, that this site causes more queuing or any kind of traffic issues?
Yeah, so not out of the site, no. There is, staff did look at the queuing at the height of the business hours, and they are satisfied that the internal queuing and circulation is acceptable for the site.
Okay, and I believe this property is within First Colony, right? So they would need to follow
Yes, the
their
Property Owners
restrictions.
Association. Mhm.
Right, okay, thank you.
LaShawn?
Laura, this gas station's been closed since 2008. I'm assuming environmentals have been done and there's no issues with environmentals?
Correct.
Mayor, second question.
Go ahead.
And signage. I didn't see any signage on your plans. I'm assuming there's not going to be any large pylons or anything like that.
Correct. Signage is actually handled through a separate permit process. So we had them actually pull it off of this permit because it is handled separately. And our standard Chapter 4 requirements, which do not allow for pylon signs, would be in effect.
Okay, no further questions.
Anyone else? Do we have a motion?
So moved, Jacobson.
I've got a motion by Jacobson. Do I have a second? Got a second by Lane?
Lane?
Motion by Jacobson, second by Lane. If you vote at this time, please. And it's a 7-0 vote, and it passes. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you.
Item number 4C, public hearing. Receive and hear all persons desiring to be heard on a proposed rezoning of 0.7906 acres from Business Office BO District to Planned Development PD District, Final Development Plan, Lake Pointe Creek Bend, that's a mouthful, live work townhomes. And we've got with us Doug Schomburg, our city planner development. Doug.
Thank you, Mayor, members of council. This evening, we're going to talk about this proposed project up at that southeast intersection, and I'm going to take y'all through, if we can go ahead and move to the next slide, the This slide gives us, back to the general land plan slide if we could. This slide gives us a view on the left-hand side of the entire Lake Pointe area that was part of their master plan. And the site is circled there in the black circle, and this is the site in question. There is a similar live-work townhomes down on the south side, closer to the St. Luke's facility. So looking at the aerial on the right-hand side of the page, we can see we're talking about the strip of land that's right along Lake Pointe Parkway. There is a vacant office tract just to the east that's not a part of this proposal. And everything is along Lake Pointe Parkway there. Wanted to talk just briefly a little bit about Lake Pointe Parkway itself and the fact that we've got a long inset of parking along the street that was built into the right-of-way. That was done on purpose. That was done by Planned Community developers as part of the installation. So as the road was built by PCD and the parking was put in. A lot of times we do not have inset parking, additional parking along the road. That was put in as part of the master plan. I'm going to take you through a little bit of history about the zoning. If we could go ahead and move to the next slide. So this small site, 0.79 acre site, is for 9 proposed live-work townhome units. A little bit about the zoning. The original Lake Pointe zoning, which was done in 2005, did include a 9-unit townhome project right at this site. It did not contain the work element at that time, but the zoning did include for townhomes. The parking inset areas that's on Lake Pointe Parkway was also part of the street concept at that point in time. So the applicants in 2011 decided to rezone this property as business office zoning, or B-O zoning, due to some market conditions at the time. What they are asking for now is to rezone that back to the townhomes, single-family attached, and have the ability to have the live-work approach with it as well. So right now there's 20 live-work units further to the south. What's being proposed in here is ability to do that. However, it's not required to do the work part for it. So the non-residential component is proposed as an option. It's not required. They've done a number of refinements that I'm going to talk about with the Planning and Zoning Commission action because they had some public comment early on that. So we could go ahead and get the next slide. Talking a little bit about the Planning and Zoning Commission, we had a public hearing for this originally back at the Planning and Zoning on January 23rd. There were a number of speakers with that, and one of the primary concerns by the speakers there was in trying to understand the project, how it would be parked, some concerns about switching from office to the townhome, the live-work townhome, and again, concerns about some of the use list in terms of the proposal. The Planning and Zoning Commission discussed a number of these questions. Some of the talk consisted of how the development fits in within that overall regional activity center that Lake Pointe is located in, parking and traffic, understanding Lake Pointe Parkway, looking at the permitted use list, looking closely at the amount of non-residential square footage that the person could have to actually do the business, and then again, overall, how would that operate? We also talked a little bit about the existing live-work, 20 units to the south. The Planning and Zoning Commission had suggested to the applicant that they also meet with the urban home development, which is not officially townhomes across to the west. They are urban style homes. They are detached with each other. They're fairly close setbacks. And the applicant had met with the Lake Pointe Townhome Association, but had an oversight and did not meet directly with the urban homes. So that was one of the things that some of the speakers mentioned. The applicant went back and met with them before the commission held their consideration and action, which was on February 27th of this year. So if we can go ahead and have in the next slide, and I'll cover a few of that elements at the meeting. So the applicant's response to that hearing was essentially they did go ahead and meet with the folks that live over there across the street with the urban homes, not just the townhomes. They took a look at the square footage in terms of what they were originally asking was up to 1,500 square feet for non-residential uses. You can only do the work on the first floor and not in the garage, but basically they had left a moderately large size footprint for the work. And they decided to whittle that down to 550 square feet max. They also modified their use list to specifically only allow professional office. And what do we mean by professional office? We're talking about a law office, office of financial advisor, these type of offices. Not a doctor's office, not medical related offices. Those are more of a service that's clinic-like. But again, professional office, which we often think of as appointment only type businesses. That was one of the modifications in addition to the square footage limitation. Additional examination of the on-street parking that has traditionally had in the other live-work townhomes a credit. So I'm going to use the word credit. The developer was asking to be able to use the same type of credit that was used at the live-work townhomes to the south. They do have 7 existing on-street parking spaces, and they're proposing to add 2 more, which could have been done originally back in 2005, just was not done. They're proposing to go ahead and finish that out. And then they agreed to add some additional parking on the access easement along the side. And I'm going to show you a little more of that in the site plan in a minute, as well as 2 guest spaces. The garages for 9 units, there are 2 parking spaces in each garage. So this beefed up some of the parking in addition. You are being asked tonight as part of the proposal to authorize the on-street credit in the manner that the prior Lake Pointe live-work townhomes were. So again, it is city right-of-way, and an owner cannot go out and reserve a street space, but the proposal is to be able to credit a space for the ability to count toward the code requirement. I'll talk a little bit more of that as we go through. One of the things that was also brought up and asked about was any traffic incidents in the area based on the public hearing comment, and staff did some research. There were 2 incidents that were reported to Sugar Land Police Department at Lake Pointe Parkway and Creek Bend from that 2017 to 2019. One of the things that we also did more recently was asked if the police department had any complaints about parking right along in this general area, and the police department followed up and said during the last 6 months they have not had a parking complaint or specific parking issues reported to them. We'll go ahead and move to the next slide. So I'm going to cover, just like Laura did with the Take 5 oil change, I'm going to cover a little bit about the future land use plan. Planning and Zoning Commission and Council worked hard through all the way up to 2018 and approved that document. This area, the entire Lake Pointe area, is a regional activity center, RAC for short there. But that includes commercial areas of Lake Pointe. It includes mixed use areas like the live-work townhomes along Lake Pointe Parkway. It includes the single-family zero lot line type patio home style ones that are on the north side of Creek Bend, and then the original floor campus, also the area where the hotels are. So this whole area is designed from the original Lake Pointe General Land Plan, master plan by the developer, started back in 0405. It was designated as a regional activity center back in 2018, which is really, again, a vision of a mixed-use, walkable, and pedestrian-friendly area. This site is less than an acre. It's one of the last sites for build-out, other than one or two other office areas just to the east. And so in taking a look at that, we looked at that overall area. We looked at connectivity, and we looked at the various uses in a large picture. The site is connected to a pedestrian network. Next slide. Let's see, I think we need to go the other direction there. Okay, we'll go to the next. So that regional activity center, as we talked about, it was really, in a way, ahead of its time before we had that type of guidance in the land use plan. We talked about this with the commission. The commission had asked some questions about it as well. How does it relate to that? And we weighed that scope and scale of this 9-unit development against that larger build-out development, and we found this to be complementary. The original vision of being able to have various townhome types of development along Lake Pointe Parkway, finishing out, also with the closeness of office development immediately to the east, having the live-work element does make sense as well. But again, that is something that wasn't original in the plan, so that's something that the Planning and Zoning Commission carefully looked at, as well as the council this evening. Next slide. We put this drawing together, and again, I'm going to go ahead and just orient y'all. North is the right of the drawing, so we've got Creek Bend Drive there, and the site itself. You can see vacant land immediately to the east. And since this aerial's been taken, the vacant land at the other corner of Creekway and Creek Bend Drive is actually developed as a medical office. That's finished out. So again, we can see that things are really finishing out, including streetscape, sidewalking. The yellow lines on the drawing are pedestrian sidewalks. This will complete part of the corner up there and start the pedestrian path along Creek Bend Drive, which is going to need to be 6 feet. The sidewalk is in along the front, as well as most of the inset parking and trees. The applicant's going to work to preserve those as well during any construction. Now, also highlighted is the existing live-work townhomes. So we really do have a variety of residential products in Lake Pointe. The live-work townhomes in the blue, that's 20-unit total. Behind them, and then along midway along Lake Pointe on the west side, we have a variety of townhome development. And then up further toward Creek Bend, we have the urban homes that were built by Pelican Builders Development. And then on the north side of Creek Bend, we have the various single-family residential that are zero lot line style. So one of the things, the strong point with Lake Pointe is really a variety of mixed products. And that's very important as this is analyzed. We'll go ahead and move forward to the next slide. I'm going to take y'all through the overall site layout here, and I'm going to orient for y'all and all the audience. On the left side of the drawing is north. So we are looking at a side view along Lake Pointe Parkway. The Creek Bend Drive is to the north. What the applicant is proposing is essentially 9 lots for the proposal. They are essentially twinned up, except for building 1. There is a reserve on the south side there, Reserve A, which includes 2 additional parking spaces that the applicant is proposing to put in. That's not a city street, that's an access drive. but that can provide some additional spaces there. That main entrance off of Lake Pointe Parkway is already there. It was installed to help serve some of the medical further to the east. The area that is kind of light reddish, just to explain what that is an existing electrical easement that can't be built over with any units. So the applicant was just illustrating that has to come be protected and come through there. Along the back of the 9 lots, there will be the tan area. That is basically the common driveway, shared common driveway to get to the garages, and 2 guest spaces that's further up along Creek Bend. They are part of what's going to be Reserve B, which is landscaping and some additional shrubs and trees. Reserve A and B are going to be part of the association, so they won't be owned by an individual property owner for the units. They're going to continue the sidewalk, and again, part of this has some green space along the front. They're set back a little ways. They are 3-story units. The first floor would have the option for 550 square feet of the office type use, professional office. However, they don't have to be used for that. Currently, right now, the 20 live-work units, there are a number of the units that aren't currently used for the work option. There's several that are closest down to the south side. I'm going to go ahead and have us move to the next slide. Kind of take you through. This is just illustrating some specifics on landscaping. With the green there is going to be new landscaping along the front. This is not eliminating trees, but this is some additional landscaping on the private property. The main pedestrian path that's along Creek Bend Drive and that's along Lake Pointe Parkway is shown with the orange, and then the light blue. These are the actual private sidewalks that will go to the units themselves. So we can see that between 7 and 8, between 5 and 6, between 3 and 4, they're kind of almost courtyard-like meeting there along the sides to the entry points. So you'll come in a little further into the side there along the available entrance along the front and then along the side further back. Go ahead and go to the next slide. We have a set of elevations. Interestingly enough, we did not have, going back in time to 2005 originally, we did not have any elevations in that PD for the townhomes that were built in Lake Pointe, which is somewhat surprising now due to how many planned developments have been done since then. But in some of the early ones, did not end up going that detailed. In this set of elevations, primarily brick, masonry on the first floor, cementatious stucco, regular stucco above that, along with glass and the use of the metal roofing there. So the applicant has provided all 4 sides of the elevation, also showing the garages. They are proposing some balconies, as also some rooftop potential area there. So those would actually be what would have to be applied during any review of building permits and things like that for staff. We'll go ahead and move to the next slide. So a number of consideration points that were taken into account and for the council as well. The final development plan is in alignment with the current general land plan. The council, many of you will remember, Plan Community Developers took forward the general land plan in 2019 to change this from business office area, saying that they had wanted to move toward townhome. That was passed through the commission and council in 2019. This final development plan does contain the list of uses that were tailored down. We believe it was the right approach to tailor it to professional office only. We also believe it was the right approach to reduce that square footage. Especially that's not something we had in the original live-work townhomes further south. The additional parking that's being added, the 2 additional spaces on Lake Pointe Parkway, 2 spaces also along the side access easement along that, and then providing 2 guest spaces toward the back, we believe are appropriate. We did look at traffic. One of the things that the applicant filled out was traffic impact analysis worksheet. Our city engineers team, as well as Public Works traffic ops, looked at the generation. It's important to remember this site right now is office zoned and allows office buildings. It does not have a minimum height for, it could allow multi-story office building. So there is an examination from how much intensity with the proposed live work townhome proposal versus the existing office. And they found it to be not significant in terms of generating any more than a typical professional office area. The as we talked about, the on-street parking is located all the way along Lake Pointe. That was something that the developers decided to do as an amenity. They are public spaces and don't allow a particular property owner to reserve a space for themselves. However, one of the things that the applicant also looked at, and it's not part of the PD because it'll be a private restriction, is filing deed restrictions. And I think they'll be able to talk about this more this evening. Filing deed restrictions to require the property owners to park their vehicles on property with the garages. That's, again, something else that we did not have with the original Lake Pointe live work townhomes further to the south. As we said, the property owner did meet further with Lake Pointe Commons HOA in response to public comments. That was something that the Planning Commission and staff encouraged them to do further reach out with. All right, next slide. I'm going to talk to you all a little bit about, since the time of the commission work, as with all public hearings, property owners within 200 feet were notified. The Lake Pointe HOA, Property Owners Association, Homeowners Association, and of course we did the publication. We did that just as Laura said with the conditional use permit, with the specialized language of contacting the city secretary office for written comments if someone wanted to have them read into the record, as well as if they wanted to call in to be able to speak directly this evening. As of when I had done the slide this morning, we had one inquiry that was not too long ago requesting a copy of the PD materials and some continued traffic questions and concerns. We did provide that requester a copy of the materials, and that was a number of days back. Since the time of this morning, just kind of summarizing everything, the city got a list of latest tally of 16 comment forms that have been sent into the city secretary's office. The majority of those expressing concerns somewhat similar to what was expressed at the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, which was literally talking about primarily parking concerns, worried about the on-street parking. There were some mention from at least 2 about some of the how would solid waste be able to be served. We can say that has been looked into, and there are several different options for that we can go into later on this evening with any consideration and action tonight. And City Secretary's office will be reading the comments into the record officially, since most of those individuals wanted them read, but we're not going to be calling in. I believe they've had at least 2 or 3 individuals sign up to speak, and they will be able to confirm that here in just a little bit. And so again, tonight, we are going to be making sure that all of those comments are covered for you. Okay, next slide. So we do support the recommendation of approval from the Planning and Zoning Commission, approving this live work townhome proposal. The conditions within the PD, we believe that based on the original public hearing that the applicant had with the Planning Commission, that there was a number of improvements that were made. A number of these are improvements that frankly are above and beyond what the existing live-work townhomes further to the south have within their current ordinances. We believe the deed restriction approach is also helpful that the applicant has agreed to do. With that, that's all that we have as far as staff, and we'll be happy to answer questions. The applicant, I believe, wanted to say a few words, doesn't have a large presentation, but was going to request to be able to discuss during the public hearing. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Doug. Why don't we, I guess next up is the applicant. Is that what you're saying, Doug? The applicant wanted to say a few words?
Yes, sir. That's correct. We've got, I believe we've got Don Jansen of Plan Community Developers.
Go ahead, Don. Good evening.
All right. Thank you, Mayor. Good evening to you and all the city council members. Appreciate your time and being able to present a little bit. I think staff did an excellent job. I think what they did is very comprehensive. I would just like to add that our approach to this was to really understand what the residents wanted, and that from the very beginning, from meeting with Rod Craig and that homeowners group, which is really on the other end of the project, listening to their concerns, actually talked to Mayor Zimmerman because he lives in the live work a little bit to get his comments. Marta Mohan is also going to be speaking, which is a realtor there. We worked with her on what was selling, what wasn't selling, because I think what's important is to come up with a product that is something that is representative of the community. I mean, obviously, this is the last set of units, 9 out of the many that are over there. And so to develop something that addresses the current needs, I think is going to be valuable for the whole community. And I think that the last point is that when we were able to meet with Lake Pointe Commons, which is directly across the street, we heard them. We've tried to be as responsive as possible to amend our project. The actual developer added parking spaces. He changed some of the architectural elements. So I think he's done everything possible to meet what I would say not necessarily demands, but just requests from residents. So we've tried to meet all this head on and be very responsive to the needs of the community. So with that, I think there will be more time for additional discussion later, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Don. At this time, Doug, I think we're ready to move to public hearing. I'd ask that the council members hold their questions, discussion until after we do the public hearing. Is that where we are, Doug?
Yes, sir. And I believe Thomas will be able to direct us from here as far as any comments.
This time we're going to go ahead and open the public hearing. Thomas, I think we'll start with, if we have somebody in the phone queue, let's start with them.
Okay.
And then when we finish that, again, so that everybody knows how this is going to operate, the council members and the staff are not going to respond to any of the comments that are made via phone. Thomas will read the other comments into the record, and then following that, reading the comments, receiving the comments, we will close the public hearing, and then we'll open it to council for questions for Q&A. So Thomas, go ahead. We're going to go ahead and open the public hearing.
Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor.
And receive comments.
Marta Mohan. She is 1411 Lake Point Parkway, Sugar Land, Texas, 77478. Marta, if you'll give your comments at this time, please.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening, Marta.
How are you doing, Mayor? Here, I live here, as they said, in a live-work townhome. I'm a realtor, and I've sold several of these homes. As has been mentioned, there is a very short list of allowable businesses. All now will be professional. Typically, you will only have 1 or 2 clients visiting at one time, so that actually controls the traffic quite a bit. Currently, as has been mentioned before, we have 20 homes that are live work in the neighborhood. Of the 20 homes at this time, there are about 7 that are being utilized as businesses. Of these, as I know for a fact, 2 of them do not receive clients or customers. So even in the 20, we don't see 100% live work. I believe that this proposed development will fulfill a need as more and more people will be working from home, many virtually as we see. And in addition, the proposed development, again, will have more parking. I really do believe that it will be a benefit to have such a development in our area.
Thank you, Marta.
Thank you.
Thomas, do we have someone else to queue?
No, sir.
Okay. So we don't have anybody else that has called in, so we're going to move to, Thomas will now read comments from what's been submitted. So Thomas, if you'd read the comments into the record, please.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. First comment, the developers have 8 or 9 mixed residential/business units in their plan. Although they have provided parking for the residents, they have only allowed for 3 parking spots on premises for the businesses operating out of that location. The developer's expectation is for business clients to use the parking on the street. I don't understand how the city planners can approve a plan under these conditions. Should not businesses provide their own parking space and not rely on street parking? I fully understand that people can park on the street, but for the developers to plan to use the street and not provide adequate parking for their development is unconscionable. Recent development of medical building on Creek Bend, just behind this plot of land, included plenty of parking for that building. I do not understand why the parking provision is not required here. Thank you. Margaret Tansen, 1122 Lake Pointe Parkway, Sugar Land, Texas, 77478. Next comment. My name is Donald Tansen. I live at 1122 Lake Pointe Parkway, Sugar Land, Texas, 77478. My concern is with the live, work townhomes is insufficient parking. Parking regulation requirements for this 9 live, work townhouse development are about 10 spaces. The developer plans to add only 6 new parking spaces, and there are problems discussed later with most of these 6 new parking spaces that they prevent their usage or addition. The developer wants to count the 7 existing street parking spaces as credits to meet its parking requirements. These 7 spaces are public parking spaces that are currently being used. Some of the visitors to the homes in Lake Point Commons use these spaces. These spaces are also as overflow parking for the Oyster Creek Boathouse. These spaces should be equally available to anyone from the general public. The developer does not have any control over these spaces and cannot prohibit the resident from parking here as proposed in Exhibit B on item F3. For this increasingly dense urban environment, it may be appropriate to install parking meters with time limits. Problem with the 2 new parking spaces inside Reserve B near Creek Bend, which will prevent them from being available, the recycling and waste disposal trucks needed in this area to turn around. Otherwise, the trucks will have to back up their entire distance from Unit 1 to Unit 9 to pick up the disposable carts. Backing up is an unsafe operation for both the driver and for the residents who may be walking outside their garage. Problem with the 2 new parking spaces on Lake Point Parkway. This property does not belong to the developer. Whether these parking spaces can be added is questionable. Does the city own this property? Why didn't the city add these parking spaces when it did the other 7 parking spaces? Is this part of an open green space reserve where no development is permitted? A similar space is presented on the other side of Lake Point Parkway. Maybe the total land available can only support the construction of 8 townhomes and the additional parking required to support these townhomes. This new development should learn from the problems caused by insufficient parking at the existing live-work townhomes on the south end of Lake Pointe Parkway. Next comment. City Council, I am concerned about the lack of parking built into the townhomes referenced above. The developer's heavy reliance on street parking will exacerbate an already problematic situation for residents and tradespeople and visitors. It is my understanding that the developer wants to count the 7 existing street parking spaces as credits to meet its parking requirements. These 7 spaces are public parking spaces that are currently being used. Some of the visitors to the homes in Lake Pointe Commons use these spaces. These spaces are also used as overflow parking for Oyster Creek Boathouse. These spaces should be equally available to anyone from the general public. The developer does not have any control over these spaces and cannot prohibit residents from parking as proposed in Exhibit B of item F3. Problem with the 2 new parking spaces inside the fence in Reserve B near Creek Bend Drive are the recycling and waste disposable trucks needing this area to turn around. Otherwise, the trucks will have to back up the entire distance from Unit 1 to Unit 9 to pick up the disposable carts. Serious consideration should be focused on these parking issues before higher density buildings is approved. It seems incumbent upon the developers to provide parking for their residents. Jane Marshall Goodsill, 1218 King Street, Sugar Land, Texas, 77478. Next comment, in regards to the referenced live-work townhomes, our main concern is insufficient parking and the negative impact it will have on our neighborhood, Lake Pointe Commons, and resulting home values. The parking regulation for this 9 live-work-play townhome development are about 10 spaces. The developer adds only 6 new parking spaces, and there are problems with most of these 6 new parking spaces that prevent their usage or addition. The developer wants to count the 7 existing street parking spaces as credit to meet its parking requirements. These 7 spaces are public spaces that are currently being used. Some of the visitors to the townhomes in Lake Pointe Commons use these spaces. These spaces are also used as overflow for Oyster Creek Boathouse. These spaces should be equally available to anyone from the general public. The developer does not have any control over these spaces and cannot prohibit parking from here as proposed. The recycling and waste disposal trucks need this area to turn around. Trucks will have to back up the entire distance from Unit 1 to Unit 9 to pick up the disposable carts. This is an unsafe operation for the driver and residents who may be walking outside their garage. The property does not belong to the developer. Whether these spaces can be added is questionable. Does the city own this property? When did the city add these parking spaces? Is the part of an open green space a reserve where no development is permitted? A similar space is on the other side of Lake Pointe Parkway. Maybe the total land available can only support construction of 8 townhomes and the additional parking required to support these townhomes versus 9 units proposed. This proposed development should learn from problems by insufficient parking that have existed in live-work townhomes on the south end of Lake Pointe Parkway. Thank you for your time and consideration. Kathy Drake, Lake Pointe Commons, 1226 King Street, Sugar Land, Texas, 77478. Next comment. City of Sugar Land Council members, I am writing to voice my disapproval of the proposed rezoning of the .7906 acres at the corner of Lake Pointe Parkway and Creek Bend as it is currently proposed. There is simply not adequate parking for the number of residents nor the commercial customers that live or work at the townhome owners will attract. I live across the street in Lake Pointe Commons community, and as evidenced by our parking situation and that of Lake Pointe townhomes, there needs to be more visitor parking per residential/business unit that is currently planned. Thank you very much. Gordon Franklin, 1218 Lake Pointe Parkway. Next comment. I'm a resident of Lake Pointe Commons, located at the address below, and I am extremely concerned at the new townhomes that are planned to be built across the street. The developer is only planning for 6 new parking spaces, and this is insufficient and will certainly cause problems to our neighborhood residents. Parking regulation requires 10 spaces. However, the developer plans to only add 6 new parking spaces. The developer would like to count the 7 existing street parking spaces to meet its parking requirement, but this is not logical at all, as this area has parking issues due to poor development plans. These spaces are already used for overflow parking for the Oyster Creek Boathouse, visitors, and the general public. More so, the developer does not have any control over the spaces and cannot prevent residents from parking here as proposed. Please consider the feasibility of this new development based on the issues mentioned. Haneth Kajawa, Lake Point Commons, 15611 Meeting Street, Sugar Land, Texas, 77478. Next comment, I'm a resident of Lake Point Commons at the address listed below, and I am concerned that the new townhomes that are planned to be built across the street. The developer is only planning for 6 new parking spaces, and this is insufficient and will currently cause problems to our neighborhood. Parking regulations require 10 spaces, but the developer plans to only add 6 new spaces. The developer would like to count the 7 existing street spaces to meet its parking requirement, but this is not logical, as this area already has parking issues due to poor development plans. The spaces are used for overflow parking for the Oyster Creek Boathouse, visitors, and general public. The developer does not have control over these spaces and cannot prohibit residents from parking here. Please consider the feasibility of this new development based on the parking issues described above. Shaila Ali, Lake Point Commons, 15611 Meeting Street, Sugar Land, Texas, 77478. Next comment. My name is Kunal Ramitri, and I am the current owner of the following property: 1110 Lake Point Parkway, Sugar Land, Texas, 77478. The following comments are for the May 5th, 2020 City Council meeting regarding item 4C, public hearing on proposed rezoning of .7906 acres from Business Office BO District to Planned Development PD District, Final Development, Lake Point Creek, Bend, Live, Work Townhomes. I do not currently like the plans of the proposed townhome development and also think the flow of traffic and people in that area will increase significantly. I hope my concerns will be taken into consideration. Regards. Next comment. I am against the Lake Point Creek, Bend, Live, Work Townhomes for 3 reasons. I live in Lake Point Commons across the street from the proposed Live Work proposal and was told when we purchased our home that the land would be used for medical offices. Commercial offices are fine in that they are set up for commercial activity that includes accommodating the amount of people that would normally visit an office. A Live Work situation is like a box of chocolates in that you do not know what you will be getting. I have experienced this when I had my offices in a Live Work complex. While it was not ideal, it was workable until an immigration attorney moved in and had people standing in line outside of his door most of the day. In addition to the excessive activity it created, it also created a real security issue. Allowing an attorney to purchase a townhome would seem rather benign until something like this occurs. This is just an example of the type of businesses that could create issues, and no, the small amount of square feet on the first floor would not necessarily prevent this. The other is the parking issue. Parking is a problem within our community at the present time, and there's no reason to think that it would duplicate itself across the street, particularly with a live-work concept. The third issue is that when it comes to selling townhomes, the builder will say just about anything within reason to sell. Our builder saying that the land would only be used for offices is a prime example. Having said that, I can easily see someone being allowed to set up a business that could cause too much activity. I can see the live-work concept being even more of an issue once resales start to hit and occur. This is simple. Just remove the work part of the live-work concept. We're not sold our homes under this. We are not sold our homes under this premise. Greg Wright, 1214 Lake Pointe Parkway. Next comment. Concerns with the live-work townhome, insufficient parking, and high traffic. Darren Lee, 1202 Lake Pointe Parkway, Sugar Land, Texas, 77478. Next comment. As a resident of Lake Pointe Commons on Lake Pointe Parkway and along with my neighbors, I have concerns about the planned live-work development across the street from our homes. These are issues that could ultimately affect the value of our properties. I would appreciate the addition of these comments being added to the meeting agenda. Number one, parking. Parking regulation for 9 live-work townhomes are about 10 spaces. The developer plans to only add 6. There are issues with most of these spaces that may prevent their addition. These are public spaces. The developer wants to count 7 of the street parking spaces as credits to meet his parking requirements, but these are public spaces that are often used for visitors, repairmen, and overflow from the boathouse, for example, and should be available for temporary parking to anyone from the general public. No long-term residential parking should be allowed. The developer does not have control over any of these spaces contained in the exhibit. 2 new planned parking spaces inside the fence in Reserve B near Creek Bend would create problems for recycling and waste disposal trucks. There is no turnaround possible, so trucks would have to back up behind the 9 townhouses. This creates a difficult and unsafe operation for both drivers and residents. 2 new planned parking spaces on Lake Pointe Parkway are also on public property. There is a question as to whether or not the city owns this property. If so, why didn't the city just add these parking spaces at the time as the other 7, Also, this land perhaps could be part of an open green space reserve such as the one on the other side of Lake Pointe Parkway. Is it possible that the total land available for this project can support a lesser number of townhomes and required parking spaces? The developer should consider that, the developer should consider the problems that are caused by the number of insufficient parking at the live-work townhomes on the south end of Lake Pointe Parkway. Number 2, traffic. Increased traffic is inevitable, especially during the construction phase of real estate. It is already difficult to predict an already increased traffic flow on Lake Pointe Parkway, as a busy thoroughfare will be compounded by construction project and the future businesses across the street. Cars and heavy trucks are constantly speeding down the parkway, and the sound of screeching tires and music from boom boxes invade our homes 24 hours a day. Most importantly, the dangers of high traffic on our street affect the safety of our children and senior citizens. Number 3, the design. It is unfortunate that the developer did not choose a more classic design for the new townhomes that would be more compatible with the existing developments on the street. Most concerning is the issue of the rooftops on the new live-work townhomes that can provide outdoor seating for social gatherings, barbecues, music, etc. Such rooftop activities may create issues for those living around us directly across the street. I appreciate the opportunity to express my concerns regarding the rezoning and the development of the proposed live-work townhomes at Lake Pointe Creek Bend. Virginia Stoller, 1206 Lake Pointe Parkway, Sugar Land, Texas, 77478. Next comment. My name is Rodney Craig. I live at 1402 Lake Pointe Parkway. My wife and I have lived at this address for 12 years. We live in one of the original work-live townhomes. I would like to speak in support of the new development. I am the president of our townhome HOA. The developers personally appeared before me at a meeting of our homeowners association to hear their concerns and to gather valuable input that can improve the owner experience in their development. Our owners were given an opportunity to see the overall design, concept, and provide input. Much of that input from our owners is reflected in the proposed development before you today. The development appears to be well designed and will offer an attractive option in design for potential townhome buyers in the area. Townhomes represent a higher density lifestyle than traditional residential development. Parking is the biggest issue for the proposed development. During our meeting, it was highly suggested that the adequate parking surface be included in the project, as well as the appropriate safeguards to limit the number of vehicles an owner can have in the community. In addition, it was recommended that all owner vehicles be stored in the garage. These requirements can be managed through deed restrictions. The visual aesthetics can be negatively impacted by having too many cars in a relatively small space. By all appearances, the developers have taken those recommendations and made them a part of their requirements in their development. It is my hope, as the project evolves, that consideration is given to proper screening of vehicles in such a way that overall appearance of the development remains attractive. We appreciate the fact that work-live use has been restricted to the same industry codes that we currently have. This will be helpful in restricting businesses that tend to draw more vehicular traffic that would burden the limit on surface parking in the area. The proposed location was initially zoned for residential townhomes. While I am not a planning professional, it would seem to me that having higher density of residential use could have a positive impact on the economy, viability of the nearby retail and restaurant establishments. Parking on Lake Pointe Parkway continues to be an issue for all of the townhomes on Lake Pointe Parkway, and it would be our collective desire to see the city address the situation that has been unintentionally created. In many cases, the parking spaces along Lake Pointe Parkway were used in the count to allow the development of townhomes. However, those parking spaces are in the public right-of-way, making them available to anyone who chooses to park there. At times, it leaves the townhomes in an underparked situation. Next comment, Susie Martinez, 1118 Lake Pointe Parkway, Sugar Land, Texas, 77478. We share similar resident sentiment regarding the Creek Bend townhome construction. 9 townhomes seems a bit much for the space, and parking will definitely be an issue. I don't agree with counting public spaces as part of this project. We are also concerned about increased traffic in that area. Has a traffic study been performed on the potential impact of increased traffic? Next comment. 1, each unit will have the capacity to park up to 4 cars with the inclusion of lifts. It is not realistic that homeowners will shuffle 4 cars in and out of their garages daily. Driving needs of parents, live-in grandparents, high school or college drivers will inevitably lead to drivers parking on the public streets or the visitor spaces of their development. 9 units with 4 cars causes a potential of 36 cars, which will quickly create a parking problem that will affect surrounding businesses and residents. Number 2, increased street parking and traffic may cause accidents to bicyclists. Bicyclists are allowed to use the full right lane in this primary residential neighborhood. Additionally, the surrounding lakes are utilized by those who fish, paddleboard, and canoe. The annual Dragon Boat Race is held on Brooks Lake, and street parking must be maintained to accommodate the general public in pursuit of these recreations. Number 3, how much traffic parking demand would be generated by the business of 9 units? Would each business be required both employee and client parking? For example, an in-home yoga studio could bring in potentially 10 clients that need parking at the same time. 9 businesses requiring parking for multiple clients and employees at the same time could not be realistically accommodated in the current plan without impacting the surrounding businesses and residences. This would create an overflow problem both day and night. The current plan relies on the best case scenario of the fewest parking demands. It doesn't appear to realistically handle a medium or high demand parking scenario. The residential designation in 2005 was probably the correct one. The further rezoning of business office in 2011 and current rezoning requests to business residential may be forcing a square peg into a round hole. If the developer proceeds without solving the serious parking issues that can be predicated at the outset by the surrounding community, this development may not be the best fit to maintain the community's harmony and uphold surrounding properties. In conclusion, there is not a shortage of other available properties in the city of Sugar Land that makes it worth distributing an entire established neighborhood for a project that could easily be built in an area that is better suited to accommodate it. Thank you for your consideration. Erica King, 15614 Broad Street, Sugar Land, Texas, 77478. Next comment. When I purchased our home in Lake Point Commons at 1106 Lake Point Commons Parkway, I did so with a certain understanding of the neighborhood. My home faced a commercial building zoned area that would be designated with adequate parking and would not rely on street parking to accommodate their commercial needs. Now it is proposed to construct a live-work townhomes across the street with a very modern design, including protruding glass balconies, which is completely inconsistent with the design of our complex immediately across the street. Design inconsistency. As mentioned above, the proposed structure is very different from the design at Lake Point Commons. Additionally, this project is designed to cram 9 units into the same amount of area where Lake Point Parkway has 6. I am not saying that the design is not attractive, it is just inconsistent with the area. All the rest of the street of Lake Point Parkway with residential structures on both sides are mirror designs, so both sides of the street, while unique, are still consistent in style and complement each other. This would not be true if the proposed project is allowed. Meeting with Lake Point Common residents. At the Planning and Zoning Committee meeting on January 23, 2020, it was suggested that our developers of the new project meet with residents of Lake Point Commons to discuss our concerns. They mainly included parking and design considerations. Regarding the parking, the developers did suggest some changes that would help, but were relying on the city to allow them to count street parking to meet the minimum requirement for the proposed commercial business activity. We were told that they would add homeowners bylaw or deed restriction that would not allow any resident to park on the street. In the last paragraph on page 161 of 199 of the agenda for this meeting, it states the developer has indicated that each townhome unit will be deed restricted to require at least 2 and up to 4 cars to be parked in the garage, which will decrease the number of vehicles owned by the townhome residents being parked along public streets. That is not the same as restricting the residents from parking on the street, which is what we're told at the meeting. We talked about the design of the townhomes, but in my opinion, there were no substantial changes that resulted from the discussion. In summary, I'm not opposed to the property being rezoned for residential construction. I believe, however, our neighborhood would be better serviced if the nature of the new project would be consistent with the existing, resulting in design changes and the elimination of the commercial aspect of the property. Brad Watley, 1106 Lake Pointe Parkway, Sugar Land, Texas 77478. Next comment. I feel that the live-work concept presents many issues in our area. Number one, increased traffic created not only by new residents, guests, and contractors, but also by clients. Possible backups when security gate malfunctions, the intersection of Lake Pointe Parkway, having left turn yield risk. Looking at the plans, I don't see how commercial trucks or emergency vehicles would be able to turn around. This creates a noise issue as these vehicles will have to back up with their loud beepers running. Number two, parking shortages. The south end of Lake Pointe Parkway has many parking issues as a result of the live-work townhomes. Do we want to replicate that here? Suppose their CCRs cannot be enforced and new residents decide to store extra cars on site. Residents of the Lake Pointe Commons rely on the overflow parking along Lake Pointe Parkway, and these spaces will no longer be available. Number three, I am concerned about what type of businesses will be allowed and the flow of customers that will result. We do not want to lose our nice neighborhood atmosphere. Number four, this is an upscale community, and I feel that the proposed architecture does not reflect that. I understand that the development has had one project prior to this, and it was on the lower end. Maintaining our property values is very important, not only to myself, but all residents of Lake Pointe Commons. Best regards, Cassandra McGee, 15615 Broad Street. That's all, Mayor.
Thank you. That will conclude the comments for the public hearing. At this time, we're going to close the public hearing. We're going to open to the council members. Before I open it to you all, I've been a resident of Lake Pointe Townhouse. I was one of the first town court to move in. Rod Craig and I think, were the first two. There are 20 units. Let me dispel some of what's been stated that's actually not factual. I'm a factual kind of guy. The town court are live-work. As Marta said, because they're live-work doesn't necessarily mean they end up like that. Out of the 20 units, we are 4 groups of 5 units. There are, Marta said 7, I had counted 9, but let's say less than half are live-work. I will tell you that the garbage pickup for our community, as well as Chris Sims' community behind us and the other product that I forget who it was built by, is one way for a garbage truck. They come in, in 12 years, we've never had a problem. They pick up the trash. There's never been an issue with an accident. There's never been any kind of an issue with public safety. So let me dispel that first and foremost. There won't be with this, in my opinion, and I am a civil engineer. Let me also address parking. There was parking. Parking was an issue probably after the first 3 or 4 years that we lived there. The parking, however, wasn't from public parking. The parking came from people at St. Luke's Hospital, employees that were using the parking for their cars. It has largely cleared itself up because staff stepped in and worked with the hospital. In the 12 years I've worked, that I've lived there, I have never seen, I repeat, council members, I have never seen, I'm around there, I'm around there day and night, as you well know, and early in the morning. I've never seen all the units on the east side, that being the side that's being talked about, I've never seen them even at capacity unless it was a holiday. And I suspect that parking everywhere when there's a holiday, either a Christmas or a Thanksgiving, that parking is a little bit challenged no matter where you are, even if you live in a residential community and have people parking in the street. So parking is not an issue, not based on what I've seen and what I know to be the facts. I'll let Doug speak to the rest, but I did want to make sure that you guys got it, the perspective. Rod and I both agree. I don't see, I'll let you as council members address it, but there is not, in my opinion, those are public parking spaces. They're available to anybody in the public, not just Sugar Land residents. It could be anybody that has a parking need. They're not to be reserved. They aren't reserved now. I happen to use one to park my truck out front, and it's available because it is a public parking space. So please read the caption. Oh, I'm sorry, Mike. What caption? Oh, we're gonna go to first consideration of an action on City of Sugar Land ordinance number 2197, ordinance of the City Council of Sugar Land, Texas, providing for a change of zoning from business office BO district to planned development PD district, final development plan for approximately 0.7906 acres of land located at the southeast corner of Lake Pointe Parkway and Creek Bend Drive. So if you'll take my comments as part of the opening, we'll now open it for questions of council members. Council members.
Mayor,
Stewart.
I have a question for Mr. Jansen, please. Mr. Jansen, what would be the impact to the development if you deleted the live-work component and just made it strictly residential?
Well, why don't I allow, if it's okay, Mukhtar Owais is actually on this, and he's the actual developer. So if it's okay with you, is it all right if I let him answer that question?
Absolutely, thank you.
Great, thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks, everybody, again for your time. One of the questions that we wanted to speak to comes from kind of a sales perspective of what happens if you remove the work component. I guess the first thing I want to say is the work component is completely optional, and just kind of extrapolating the math from the other side of the units, I would say 25% of the units might end up being a work type of situation. The second thing is I think it kind of puts us in an interesting lane with everything that's kind of going on right now, and what Marta mentioned, people shifting to a more work from home type of atmosphere, and companies kind of reshifting their focus. So I think from a sales perspective, this would be perfect for somebody like an attorney who only has clients that come with an appointment, who wants to kind of close up shop at a small office and cut some overhead and move to a unit like this that he could work out of, or a financial advisor that currently works out of the other units who maybe sees a few clients a week. So I think from a sales perspective, we do have an advantage, and it just helps that it's optional and it's not a mandatory thing.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Himesh, did you have your hand up? Who else? Steve? No, Shed, Carol, got it. Okay. Go ahead, Himesh.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. Number one, Doug, was the Planning and Zoning Commission unanimously sending this to us, or was there any objection there?
Let me go ahead and talk just a little bit about the commission action. The commission vote was not unanimous. There was one member of the commission that had concerns. However, that was kind of summed up as part of it was believing that the market might not support the proposal. So I hesitate to get too much further into that because that's really not part of our staff work. But there was a feeling that the live work product might not really be supportable in that area. I know that they had, of course, listened to various public comments as well. But that was essentially my effort to summarize that. We did have a member of the Planning and Zoning Commission recuse themselves, so they were not part of the voting due to being in the 200-foot area. and speak about the item on the record. I believe that there was also at least one member absent that night. So we did have one member vote against it, and we had at least 4 members vote for it.
Okay. Doug, if I have a law office there and I have myself there and one employee, and then I have a client that's coming in, are they all supposed to park in the public spaces, or are there some, I don't know if you want to call it overflow, but is it just the street parking that's there? That would be where the offices would need to have their guests and their employees park?
That's a good scenario to be able to kind of illustrate what is available. So with the approval of the plan, there will be 2 additional spaces opened up on the street that I kind of mentioned during the presentation. Could have been built originally in 2005 with the development. I think one of the comments mentioned, why didn't the city do it? Well, the city didn't build the road at all or the parking, but it's not part of a landscape open space reserve. But let me kind of narrow in on that. So with the scenario that you would have the 9 parking spaces on the street, there would also be 2 parking spaces that would be created on the access way in, that's private access drive there. And then there are 2 guest/visitor parking spaces that are behind the units. And I don't know if City Secretary's office could put up I think it's slide 58 here. It might be easier to look at that drawing while we're talking.
Yeah, Doug, it's Reserve A and Reserve B. There's 2 spaces each.
Right. So there's some spaces there that I just thought this may be helpful for us. So if you're looking at the left, upper left part, there's 2 additional spaces that are not part of the unit lots themselves. So that has some ability to be guest or whoever. You could have, have a visitor, have a staff member park there. And then the Reserve A, as the mayor was saying, on the right-hand side, is going to have 2 spaces created there as well. So you are not limited to you and your, you just in your garage and everyone else parking out on the street. The plan that was refined here and that's before y'all has the 2 additional spaces over in that reserve, and then the Reserve A, and then the 2 additional spaces in Reserve B.
So if I'm correct about, I appreciate it, Doug. So and correct me if I'm wrong, if they're in the private areas, then certainly, if I have a law office there, I can put a sign that says these are reserved for my guests, correct?
You could technically, in the private areas, I would say that since this is going to have, I don't want to get too dry here and technical, but since this is going to have a Reserve A and Reserve B that's going to have to be HOA owned, not owned by the individual residences, there's going to have to be some type of understanding as far as you wouldn't reserve it for one of the businesses, but you could certainly say that's certainly not public parking just for anybody to drive up and park there.
Right, but the HOA in theory can creatively come up with a way to encourage those parking spots to be for the guests or the invitees of this development. Fair?
That's correct. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. And I guess the other question I had was on this issue of the garbage. I guess I didn't quite understand what the concern there is. Is the concern that the garbage wouldn't be able to be picked up properly? I was a little confused about what that concern was.
Well, I'm going to tell you the best that we can interpret what we had heard on the comments and what we had read was concerned that since this the shared common driveway along the back of these doesn't exit out onto Creek Bend up there, was there going to be a problem with a big garbage truck? So we did talk with the city's environmental and neighborhood services folks, the ENS group, that manages the Republic Waste contracts and services, and asked them some questions about that. And what we found out was there's several different options that could be used, including a smaller route type of truck. That it's not, in fact, they said that they do a little bit of that in a few parts of Sugar Land in the area. They could also have a valet type service that's worked out, or again, they have room. They might have to back out with a large truck, but they said there's 2 to 3 other options that, and they said they can definitely serve this. There's not an issue with serving it, but they don't just have to roll out a standard model, if you will. So I thought that was helpful to understand. There was originally going to be an additional parking space instead of 2 up there on the Creek Bend side. There was going to be 3. One of the Planning and Zoning Commission comments during the meeting was that might be a little tight up there. It would be better to have a little bit of room, a little bit more room. The applicant agreed to revise that. That's about all I could really say about the waste management, but we did run that question, talked with our folks who manage that, and they talked with Republic Waste so that they could get a real feel for that 9 units as far as the trash. They would not pick up from Lake Point Parkway, though. That's not how the waste collection is. So.
Okay, Mayor, I got just 1 or 2 more final questions.
Go ahead, Himesh.
Doug, the uses, I know I used the law firm example, but the uses are actually described as professional services, right?
They have refined it to be professional office. And I think one of the letters mentioned a yoga studio idea.
Yeah, that's where I was going
right. So that would not fit into that. We're talking about a literal office type environment. So I'm going to be able to do
Doug, just to keep the record clear, though, professional services, can you give, I don't know, 5 examples other than a law firm and financial services?
Sure. Well, we've got, like you said, other than the attorneys, you could have a realty office, you could have some specialty work in some management consulting, specialized consultants. Those are sometimes people contact us for wanting to be in the live work to the south, or they're thinking about it. I will say that there are 2 or 3 things that are allowed in the live work because it's not identical. The existing live work had some other options that are not being proposed for this. And one of those was a photography studio, for example. And there was also the ability to do some jewelry and watch repair, some little type repair services. To my knowledge, we haven't really seen anything like that. But what they did with this one is take that and refine it down to really just office only. So really kind of got rid of any type of thing that might be more of a repair or a modified service that I think another one was tailoring, as a matter of fact, is allowed in that other set of live work. So this is more restrictive in that it is really those low traffic for the most part one. So I hope that helps a little bit. Again, several of those, the photography, the tailoring, some of those are not allowed in this because they're not classified as under the professional office services.
Thank you.
Himesh, would it be okay if I address your example about the attorneys?
Yes, please.
Okay, so specifically, the developer was thinking about this issue. So where we've allowed the size of the parking garage to be wide enough and tall enough to allow lifts. Lifts might not work for everyone, but in this example, it's a perfect example. Mm-hmm. So if the attorney knows he's going to be working all day and he has employees coming, the lifts will be up, his car will be parked above, their employee, whether it's their administrative assistant or someone else that's coming to see him, can park underneath the lift. So I think your example is exactly why the list will work. So if you say, and I've been hearing different counts thrown out, so really the potential for this project is that if you say there's 18 that are going to be residents, meaning 2 per unit, and if they have lifts, maximum potential is 36 cars. And with the 4 additional, what I would say are the visitor spaces, that's 40 cars. So I think people are throwing around numbers that kind of misrepresent the potential, and that doesn't even include the spaces that are along the street. If you add those 9, that's actually 49 spaces. So I just want to clarify what the true count is and the number of spaces that are being provided.
No, I appreciate it, and that addresses my concern on the parking. So.
Okay.
Thank you.
Nishad?
John, you just mentioned the lifts. Will all units have lifts in them?
It's really at the option of the actual owner, whether they have lifts, meaning they're sized so that they can have lifts. Okay. So if by deed restriction, if they're going to have more than 2 cars, then they're going to have a lift.
Correct, but then the house can get sold in the future, and there could become an issue in the sense that now we don't have a lift in here, and I need more parking spaces. So then I see where the resident's going to have a little bit of a concern. Just a comment there, because it seems like it's an option, and it's probably an expensive option that folks won't want to spend the money up front.
Well, it's actually deed restricted. So if the next person buys it, he's buying it under the same pretense as the first owner. So just because you sell the unit doesn't mean that they wouldn't have to add the lifts. See what I'm saying? I mean, whoever's there, if they have more than 2 cars, they have to add the lifts.
Correct. So you can add the lifts after the fact that the house is built?
Yes, they're freestanding. Yes, they're not attached to the building, to the garage itself.
Okay, makes sense. Doug, next question's for you. Back in 2019, when this came to City Council, was the plan different, or were we showing 9 units at that time?
The plan was the general land plan, so it didn't define the number of units. It was taking that tract and basically saying, do we think this should still be part of this larger office area, or do we think that this should be able to be the townhome? So that's the general land plan, a little more of a concept plan there. Basically, council ultimately said, we believe townhome type development and not an office district is appropriate, and then the zoning would have to carry that out.
Sure, okay, thank you. And then one more, Mayor, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Since the agenda came out to the public, I've had a few residents also contact me as well. And the concern is what we've all heard in all those comments that Thomas sat out and read. Pretty much all of them said something about parking. So at different times throughout the weekend, I did drive by there, and I did notice that those parking spots are being utilized over the weekend, today and yesterday. So I'm a little concerned with the number 9, the number of units and the parking. And so is there an opportunity here for us to go from 9 to 8, 9 to 6, 9 to 7, and still make it viable?
Let me just address that from a staff standpoint. I'm going to only present this as from a just technical standpoint.
Sure.
The council can decide the council can't grant something that is less restrictive. The council can decide to grant something that's more restrictive than the Planning and Zoning Commission. So you technically have that ability. Obviously, that's not something we're recommending, on or the P&Z. But from a technical standpoint, y'all can decide to be more restrictive in the PD zoning as part of your recommendation. And I don't know if legal would have if Meredith have any comment beyond that.
Thomas, can you let Meredith in?
I agree with what you said, Doug. Thank you.
Mayor, I have no further questions right now.
All right, let me go to Jennifer Lang.
Okay, so have these complaints been coming in the past for parking in the street issues from the other townhomes?
I'm going to address that to the best I can. As far as the southern live work area there had been a number of complaints that were really becoming more concerning around 2018 that in fact the HOA had reached out. As we said, the spaces in the street are public, so the city can't make people leave, and the homeowners, whether they're live work or whether they just do home, can't make them leave either. But the primary element to that, when more research was done, in fact, the police department had done a little bit of monitoring, staff had done some monitoring from our public works staff in traffic, was that St. Luke's had a number of employees that were parking over there for whatever reason, didn't want to drive up to the inside the garage or some of those things. And the city had reached out over time to the management there at St. Luke's and MD Anderson in the professional office building, and they were able to address with their staff from a private standpoint of, hey, we've got a surface lot and we've got a parking garage, and these spaces along the street, while they were public, they were really designed around the needs of the folks right along the street. So what the city had seen is a definite drop-off of crowding, especially around the live work area from those. So again, I think Mr. Craig said in his comments was absolutely true as to what the city saw, which was folks from nearby, but not the actual units, whether they were live work or not, tended to be crowding those. Now, St. Luke's is much closer down to the south end of that, but that's what was found. And Chief Robbins had indicated that they have not gotten a complaint in the last number of months, I think up to the last about 6 months, about parking, period. And again, the city was not running people off of the public spaces. There was also a few comments about this being available for the boathouse and some of those other things. And again, that while that's not, I'm not saying that people may not have used that, these spaces all along the development there along Lake Pointe Parkway were really intended and built for this mixed-use environment along there, both the live work as well as the townhomes, to create more of a street element. And they were not built to try to park the boathouse or a special event or something. So again, they are public, but that really was not the focus of them. And our best efforts, can still be used in terms of, if we see something that we could bring to a management, like a large scale building like St. Luke's or that. But again, what you're being asked tonight is essentially to be able to credit the project and the PD to be able to utilize some of those spaces to count towards a parking requirement. That's what the council's being asked for. That's what was done in 2005. That's also what the mixed-use conservation district along Brook Street has. It has on-street parking that is striped out. No one can reserve them. They're available to the public, but they do count as a credit toward meeting parking. If council doesn't feel that that's appropriate here, then that's really part of the equation. We believe that this has some safeguards that, frankly, don't even exist in the southern live work. So we do feel like, based on some of those safeguards and the addition of the spaces in the reserves, help out. But that's a long answer to your question, but I wanted to be comprehensive because we've got a lot of folks that obviously have concerns about it out there.
Well, and I appreciate everyone writing in and calling. It seems to be a very strong concern of some of the residents there. And I was just curious to know that if we went through with the development, then what's our course of action if we do have a problem with parking or with garbage pickup. So I don't know, have we done like some type of what did we call it, valet service or smaller trucks within the city before?
It's our understanding there are some things like that. I can't off the top of my head park to real close. I think Don may have a comment on there with the mayor's permission.
Go ahead, Don.
Okay, and I think Mukhtar, you can address this as well. I mean, I think it's options that they've already explored. Mukhtar, why don't you address that? If it's Jennifer, it's okay if Mukhtar addresses that question.
Yes.
Okay.
Sure. Go ahead, Mukhtar.
Happy to speak. So we're actually setting up trash service for another community that we're doing in Richmond, and we're using a different company. And I think Republic Waste Services has kind of the similar pricing tiers on different services that you want. So one of the clear-cut, straightforward options is a smaller truck, which is no bigger than just your average size pickup truck that comes and picks up the trash. And obviously that would kind of take away some of the concerns with a bigger truck maneuvering and backing up with the beepers. The other option is a valet service type of thing. So where a big truck would come in, it wouldn't need to pull all the way into that street. It would just pull into the gate, and then they would have workers that come off the truck. And since it's only 9 units, about a 250-foot street, they would just wheel the carts out to the truck. The truck would empty them, and then they would just put the bins back outside the garages where they need to go. So there's a couple different options when it comes to trash service. So it's a valet service or the smaller truck option.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Jennifer. Steve?
Thank you, Mayor. Address this question to Don Jansen. Don, what do you expect the cost to be for a lift to be installed after the residence is purchased?
Actually, I think Mukhtar, didn't you price those? Sorry, Steve, he's actually done the pricing on that, if that's okay.
That's okay.
The pricing doesn't change when you do it in a new construction house that's being built or you do it after the fact, because like you mentioned, it's a freestanding lift that just gets bolted into the slab of the garage. So if none of them had a lift, they could be installed after the fact as well. A lift for a 4-car, so a 2 lift, so you can park 2 below and 2 above, ranges anywhere from $6,000 to $8,000 installed. So it's relatively inexpensive compared to options like storing your car in outside storage and delivery service, which I think came up in the HOA meeting. Some of the residents do that to kind of alleviate their parking needs if they have multiple cars. So compared to those options, it's relatively inexpensive.
Okay. My next question has to do with the people's comment around the roof patios and the potential for noise. You want to react to that?
Absolutely. So the roof patios we've designed, so the houses, the front of the houses is going to be facing Lake Pointe Parkway. And then the entrance for the garages and the trash pickup will be in an alley on the back. And all the rooftop decks that we're trying to do are going to be on that back side. And then the front of it is going to be completely covered. It's a higher plate. So from the front elevation, driving down the street, you won't even be able to see the rooftop decks. They're all going to be facing the opposite side. And they're the elevation's higher than what's behind it, which is the commercial. There's a couple medical offices, an eye doctor. And so on a clear day, the direction of the rooftop balcony lets you kind of see the Transco Tower. And at night, you might be able to see kind of lights from downtown Houston as well on a clear day.
Okay, thanks. As I understand it, maybe Doug can answer this. As I understand it, that boathouse is maybe 500 yards or so away from this development. That's like 5 football fields. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. We did a little, when we had heard that in some of the comments, we did a little general measurement, and that's exactly right. It's about 500 yards, the 5 football fields from it. It has a small surface lot, so it doesn't just rely on street, but that's correct. It's fairly good ways.
So this is a private boathouse for whom?
I can't speak too detailed into how that operates. I believe it was, at one point, it was Greater Houston Rowing Club, and through some kind of arrangement through FCCA or something, and maybe Don has a little insight into that. I just don't want to misquote anything on that.
Sure. Steve, it was actually built for the residents in Lake Pointe, and so it was meant to be kind of a common community area. The Greater Houston Rowing Club came along and they said, well, we can utilize the upstairs and put let our crews work in and out of there, because they really don't have much in the way of people that come, other than they come and they get their boats and they take them out to the lake. So that was kind of an accommodation. I think they get a little bit of rental income that goes towards the maintenance.
So whatever the I guess it's still an amenity for the Lake Pointe development, and it's also in use by a rowing club. Is there sufficient parking down there for that?
I honestly couldn't tell you because I've never been there. So I'm going to be honest and purely honest. Maybe Doug knows better than I, but we just know that because most of the people that were going to be going there were going to be residents, and to their point, if you can walk there, then they're going to be walking over there for an event. You wouldn't need as much parking. It's a fairly small site too. So, I think one thing led to another. Putting a community center that's available to that public and then within walking distance, you probably wouldn't need as many parking spaces.
Well,
I know it was reviewed as far as the parking would have been based on a ratio with the square footage of the little building itself. It wouldn't really be able to take into account if the club was doing some special thing or another, as far as that goes. But it was done with the structure itself years back, so it wouldn't park special events, though.
So if the residents have a boat somewhere, don't they have to drive it there?
Well, you can't actually have regular boats on there because it's restricted as far as the type of boats that can be used. I mean, I think that isn't it electric only or something, and it's 25? I don't even know, but I've never seen a boat on that lake other than a rowboat.
Okay. One of my biggest concerns, and certainly the concerns that have been expressed to me directly, as well as mentioned tonight, is parking. We talk about the main amelioration of that would be a deed restriction. And as far as I know, I've not seen a lot of deed restrictions, but every single one I've ever seen can be amended. And usually that's a daunting task because we're talking about, in Sugar Land anyway, very large subdivisions, planned communities where it's very difficult to get 75, 90%. But now we're talking about 9 townhomes where it would be to their advantage to change the deed restriction and allow them and all their friends to park in the front. So what I would really want to hear is how come that's not the case? From somebody.
Well, I think if it's for the advantage of the homeowners to protect as many parking spaces as possible, do you really want to cannibalize spaces by you yourself getting that advantage? Once again, they are public spaces, so you would be giving somebody the ability to actually overpark the area, which was not the original intent of the developer. I mean, any deed restriction can be changed. You're absolutely right, Steve. I just think as people come into this and they have the ability up front to put the lifts in so that they can live within the restriction, I don't think it'll happen. But I don't think you can prevent it, certainly. For me to sit here and say you can would be an untruth.
Well, I would, there's going to be a second reading on this, Doug? Schomburg?
That's correct, assuming that it passes.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, I'm very concerned about the possibility that people are not going to be general interest, and will find it to their advantage I don't have to work. I'm not living and working, and so I'm going to put my 2 teenage sons' cars out front rather than spend $10,000 and all the trouble to raise them up and down. So I wonder if there's any possibility to look further into a deed restriction law, that there's any way you can have a non-amendable portion of it. I would really like to know that if we have another vote on this.
Okay.
Don't have to know it tonight. I guess the last question I have, Mayor, if I can have one more,
Go ahead, Steve.
is I was, a lot of the comments are prospective, that we think there's going to be a problem. But Mr. White listed an issue that he had seen. And so, given that we can have attorneys, what capability would there be to prevent a recurrence of his example of an immigration attorney in a line outside the office? Would there be a way to deal with that? Anybody?
Well, I guess one thing you could do is make a restriction on attorneys. I mean, you're talking about restrictions and being able to put uses in that are allowed and are not allowed, then you can list specifically what's allowed rather than saying these can't be allowed. These are what can be allowed. So I don't know from a legal, Meredith, I don't know if that's legal or if you can do that, but
Can I say something?
Go ahead, Amish.
Steve, to your point, in the example that was provided, I'm not sure if the example has the same square footage reduction and requirement that this development does. Remember, these are pretty small spaces, so you're only going to have a few people at a time in this small space, in theory.
Yeah, the concern was, though, Himesh, that there would be a line outside and you've got 10 people in line with 10 cars somewhere. Just as an example that has really actually happened to somebody.
Right, but what I'm saying is the office that they were showing could have been a very different characteristic of office. I mean, there's more dynamics to it than just, I mean, you could take the same position that a real estate agent could have 10 clients show up because they need real estate advice. I mean, you can make that claim on a lot of different things. It's being a lawyer, I can tell you, in my 17 years of practice in law, have never seen a law firm with a line out the door, ever.
Yeah, I think his example, though, was probably, the type of operation that doesn't need a very large space because they're doing it more out of. Anyway, that would be if we could somehow deal with that concern and the concern that the deed restrictions could just be changed by the residents deciding that. I'd really like to hear more about that if we get to vote on this again. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Steve. Carol?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, is there any sort of a limit of the number of employees that someone could have at one of the businesses with the live work?
The current ordinance does not have a specific limitation on employees. It was crafted like the southern area where the live work townhomes are that didn't have that provision. Now that is something that could be put into the ordinance. If you have a home occupation in your own home, one of the restrictions is in a single family neighborhood that it doesn't rely on employment from the outside. These were not designed that way in the 2005 proposal. That may be something that could be looked at, and I don't know if the applicant might have any feedback as to an issue with that, if that's something council wants to hear from on it.
And also, go back to a question, I guess, that Councilmember Lane had asked earlier. I hadn't heard of any parking issues on the south part of Lake Pointe Parkway, but just in the course of general conversation, well before I ever heard about the PD, I had heard some issues about some parking problems on the north end near the creek bend side. But I just had a question for you, Doug, on the Development Code, Chapter 2, Article 5, Section 210A. It says in all districts for every use, there must be provided at the time any building or structure is erected, enlarged, or increased in capacity, an off-street parking lot. So does that apply to, this is going to be changed to a PD, so does that, when it says all districts for every use, does that apply to a planned development district?
It applies in general. I will say through the PD process, it's a set of alternative regulations. Now, one thing that wouldn't be able to happen is that an applicant park only using the street. In the case of the live work that council originally approved, you're basically approving the plan with the ability to have a credit. So this is about a parking credit, but it doesn't mean that no parking spaces, no garage spaces could be done. That would be essentially 100% free. So the short answer is, through the PD process, you are approving an alternative plan, something that would not otherwise be able to be approved except through that zoning. However, you are approving the ability to credit some of the on-street.
Okay.
So that's the short answer.
Okay, I guess that's what I'm hearing from a lot of the comments tonight, that there's concerns. I guess they're asking, why should we give credit to credit on-street parking credit off-street parking toward the I got it backwards, on-street toward the off-street. Yeah. So anyway, boy, I'm getting my tongue twisted. No break. That's what it does when you get no break, Mayor. I was wondering also. They are proposing adding 2 additional on-street parking where there's currently some green space, but I believe there's a site mirroring that on the other side of Lake Pointe Parkway. Could that green space be converted to 2 additional parking spaces as well?
That's something that could be looked at as long as it's in the street right of way. The city has the ultimate authority over that. As far as that goes, without looking at it further, I would hate to say too much more just off the cuff here. But I will say that none of that is a reserve of any kind. I really need to clarify that for the record, because several commenters start talking about landscape reserves. So these were all designed originally to be able to be built all the way through. So yes, short answer is there could be additional on-street inset spaces done wherever there is room along Lake Pointe Parkway. The city's not opposed to that as long as it meets the safety requirements of the traffic operations.
Okay, and several of the commenters tonight raised the issue about the fact that the proposed townhome development has a very modern design, sort of trendy, contemporary type features, whereas your brownstones and some of the other residential areas are, I guess, a little more classic or traditional or something like that. And I guess I'm hearing some concerns about design inconsistency with the rest of the development there. on Lake Point Parkway. And was this discussed at all at P&Z about the just the facade and the design difference?
P&Z reviewed the drawings, the elevation drawings, and we talked to them about the area. And again, we're looking at this from the entire Lake Point Parkway area. I know folks are focused with if I live in this particular set of units, but we've got a variety of residential products just on Lake Point Parkway. We looked at it in general from staff, but again, sometimes those things they can be challenging as to say what's acceptable, what's not. We're not an HOA type, colors or other review. And in fact, it's only through the PD process as well as historic areas, because the state of Texas took that right away from cities.
Right.
So we did look at that and talked with P&Z about what they were proposing. The overall feeling was that that was reasonable, and they felt it was compatible with the overall Lake Point Parkway area there. But we weren't coming in with the approach that it needed to match the urban homes specifically, or it needed to match a particular brownstone or things like that. That is something that council does have full authority over in terms of, because you do have the ability to not only with the finishes, but also elevations. They're proposing to codify elevations, and this will be the first Lake Point townhomes that actually include elevations at all. The council didn't approve anything on any of those other ones except a materials list. So we've worked with the applicant. We did not hear from P&Z that they had a concern about that. But again, that's probably all staff can offer at this point. If the council determines that they don't believe they're compatible, we believe as staff they're essentially compatible with, again, we're looking at the old Lake Point Parkway as an area of a mixed-use development, regional activities.
Carol, can I speak to that just for a second, please?
Yes, Tom.
So we actually looked at that, and if you look at renderings really don't do a real good service towards what's actually going to be built. So what they really concentrated on, if you look across the street, those are stucco and they're brick and stone. These are going to be stucco, brick, and stone. And I mean, I think Mukhtar spoke to this. The rendering shows blue windows. They're actually not going to be blue windows. They're going to be the clear windows that would actually match across the street. So the renderings themselves, although the lines are straight and they look contemporary, I think when you look at the materials, it's going to definitely soften the look. They're not going to be white stucco. It's actually more of a creamy. So I understand their comments, but I don't think they're going to look as extreme, if you would, as the renderings show. And I think, not to speak for Mukhtar, I think he's open and has been open to trying to address some of those architectural concerns. For example, the balconies. The balconies are not artificial balconies. The ones across the street are kind of just stuck onto the edge. They're not real balconies. This is actually going to be a real balcony, which is much more expensive to do, and they're actually functional. They're not real wide, but they're wide enough for somebody to open their doors and let the air come in, and they can walk and stand out there. They just can't put a bunch of furniture on there. So these are actually $200,000 to $250,000 more expensive than those units, just the asking price. So if somebody's concerned about property values, these are actually much more expensive than even their units.
Okay.
Whatever that.
Yes, and another question, I guess, for you, Don. I guess a couple of the commenters had said, what about reducing it from 9 to 8 units and adding additional parking on site? Is that something that would be feasible, or would it affect the value of the development too much?
Well, I think that's more of a Mukhtar question, because it's kind of his money and his pro forma. My initial comment as a developer is to say I don't think that's going to have a material difference on the project. Going from 9 to 8, I mean, that's one unit, that's two spaces, and it's real difficult on, so now you would have spaces that are not going to be gated also, because the gated control is at the very back entrance. And where you're really trying to sell is a gated community, which is consistent with every project in Lake Pointe. So I don't know. I'll let Mukhtar address that, but
You're muted. You're muted.
You're going to have to unmute.
Mukhtar, you're muted. You need to unmute.
Sorry about that.
And just start over, please. I missed the first part.
So when we were originally planning the development, our aim was to try to do the duplex units to get obviously the most yield. But we had 10 units. We were originally trying to fit 10 units on that plot. That would ideally make kind of the numbers work out from a developer perspective. We were open to cutting it down to 9 to add those 2 extra parking spots. I think from a feasibility standpoint and what the price point that we want to get for these houses and the value that we're trying to create, ideally we would like to stick to 9 units. I think 8 units just doesn't get us the basis that we need for this project. But like I said, we did have 10 units. We cut it down to 9 to be able to accommodate for the extra parking that we wanted to add. So we added 6 total additional spaces, more than there are there currently.
Plus, you created a separation between the units, which added more green space, rather than connected units all the way across.
Correct.
And Doug, just one really quick question. We talked about the fact that we need to have like a valet trash service or have a special small size truck come in there because you just don't have the opportunity for a regular size, trash truck or recycle truck or green waste truck to come in there and turn around. Would that, I'm sure that would cost more than just regular. So would the residents of those 9 units have like some sort of a surcharge or something for an extra parking, an extra trash pickup fee because of that?
Correct. So I can't speak to the prices that Republic Waste charges. Was that a question for Doug? I'm so sorry.
That's a question for Doug, but if you want to answer that, if you want to answer,
I think it definitely would, but I'd like to. I think Mukhtar can definitely. He had some additional information.
So I know Republic Service probably has a different price sheet on how much they charge, but just to kind of give you some perspective, we're using Texas Pride Disposal at another project that we're doing. The difference between the 3-tier options, it's like $16 for the basic one where they come up to your door, and then it's like $20, and then it's $24 for the one where it's valet and there's 2 guys where you don't even really need a cart. If you just put your trash bags out, they'll come get it if they have to.
Okay.
Relatively inexpensive, and that would be built into the HOA fees and the HOA dues to take care of that for the homeowners.
Okay, thank you.
Stuart, go ahead.
Yeah, I just have one question, please. Now, and this may be a Meredith or a Doug question. Is it feasible to restrict parking in evenings and weekends just to residents? In some cities, we give stickers to people who live there residentially, and that way, in the evening, it would be reserved for residents or their guests.
Meredith, you take it.
Okay, I figured out how to unmute. Well, we could look into that. We do have a permit process for residents located close to Clements High School. And so we may be able to implement something similar here. It would just be an enforcement question as far as do we have the capacity to enforce it? Do we have the manpower to enforce it? But we can certainly look into that.
Okay, thank you. That's all I had. It seems like that may be a distinct possibility for those who are worried about visitors not having a place to park. If you're not supposed to park on the street, it doesn't matter during the day. It shouldn't matter in the evenings, but it's good for leaving space open for visitors. So thank you very much, Meredith.
Hey, Doug, can I address Steve's question? Can I go backwards just for a second on the 2 spaces and the issue about the deed restriction? When we did Mercedes and a lot of different projects, we put very specific restrictions in ordinances. I mean, very, very restrictive. Why couldn't we add in the ordinance that it's limited to 2 per unit unless they put in a lift?
I don't believe we could from a standard point. What we did with Mercedes was about loading and unloading commercial vehicles. I think that's probably, the max we could do. But boy, I'd have to defer to legal on that.
Well, no, I guess what I'm saying is, I wasn't speaking specifically to loading and unloading, but, I mean, we have things, a laundry list that we restricted Mercedes to, that were a lot of things that were very specific to the dealership. Very, very specific. If you looked at that list, I could see where something like this could easily be justified, and even from a legal perspective, it's not much different than we did with them.
Is that a question?
I don't think we could go too much further on it, but again, we'd have to defer to legal. I know they've researched before a little bit about some of the public parking, and I think there was pretty much a determination that as long as those spaces were public, the city couldn't get too heavily involved in who it was or who it wasn't. That's different than somebody leaving a vehicle there for a long time. There's some different regs there, but
Meredith,
I don't know that we could go much further.
Question for Meredith. Meredith, I remember dealing with this when we were dealing with the Lake Pointe. And what I remember of the discussion was that those spaces, because they were in the public right of way, they were essentially public spaces, that we could not, even by ordinance, restrict those.
Correct, because they were public.
And you have the same, Stuart, you have the same issue here. So you have public spaces that were built in a public road right of way, that the public, because it is a public right of way, the public has every right to use those spaces.
Okay, maybe I'm not asking the question right. Sorry. What I'm saying is, for the individual private units, to Steve's point, how do you enforce the restriction that those people have to use their spaces? Meaning whether it's 2 or 4, if they have a lift, it's 4, if they don't have a lift, it's 2. That they themselves as owners cannot add additional cars to what their dwelling unit would be. That's very specific from a private standpoint. That has nothing to do with the public spaces.
No, and you and I are talking about two different things. I was trying to address what Stuart had mentioned, which was restricting access to public spaces in a public right of way with, during evenings or weekends, because we took that discussion up when we first had the issues down with the town courts, which were the live work. And that's why I asked Meredith the question, was because we dealt with that very issue and came up, the direction from the city at the time was that we could not do that. Now, what you're talking about, I can't speak to deed restricting, the units themselves to, I can't answer that question. That's a Meredith question.
I don't know how we would enforce a deed restriction on public property. We could put some enforcements in place as far as public property, like a permit process or a certificate like we did for Clements High School, where you could only park there for certain hours. You had to have a permit to park there during certain hours. But as far as saying it can't be a resident, we generally give the residents greater ability to park there than the general public if it's directly in front of their home. But I cannot think off the top of my head how we could prohibit the general public or a resident from parking on a public space without a comprehensive plan.
So if this was Doug, this is a question for you. If this is a medical building, could the general public still park there if they were going to the medical building?
Yes.
If they were going to that service, yes.
Correct. So whether it's the condos, townhomes, or a medical building, anyone could park in that space. And if you're coming to a medical building, you're coming every day. They have employees that are coming every day. So I don't really, I'm just saying, just from an overall perspective, I don't see a lot of difference between the two uses and the restricting that or not, for the benefit of the homeowners across the street.
Any other questions from council? Council, what's your pleasure? Steve? Steve or Carol, I see two hands up. Steve?
Carol, you want to go first?
Oh, I just said, yes, the only thing that I'm still wrestling with is just, why should on-street parking be credited toward the off-street parking requirements? And that's the one thing that I'm left struggling with on this.
Steve?
Mayor, I guess for me, first I want to thank Mr. Jansen and the developer. I apologize, I can't remember your last name, for the accommodations that they have made, trying to get to some sort of a consensus of what will work there. Limiting the uses, limiting the size, adding extra spaces. We've worked with the developers that weren't nearly that cooperative, and so I want to just say thanks for that. And thanks for being here and listening to the concerns. I think, given my concerns, I'm not ready to support it, but given that we're still looking for solutions to some of the issues, I'd be willing to vote on it on the first pass rather than sending it away. And then if we can't solve the problems, then I may not be able to support it on the second pass. I don't know if that's a waste of time or not, but we, as the staff certainly knows, District 1 has had their fair share of parking issues and on-street parking. And I wouldn't find a consensus of people that were willing to sign up for that again. I can tell you that. So that's my thought, Mayor, is rather than send them away, which causes the whole thing to start over, I guess, I'd be willing to wait another till they can come up with a better plan to address some of these things, and let it go to a second consideration.
Okay, Carol?
I was just wondering, can we table the vote tonight and let them further explore this and bring it up again and then vote on it the next time after it's had more, I guess, discussion of this parking issue, or do we have to vote on it tonight?
Meredith?
You can table it and we can work on it some more and bring it back to you.
This is the first time, this public hearing is really, I wasn't at the P&Z, so this public hearing is really the first time that I've been able to hear all of the information. I have to say that I'm not inclined to push it away forever. I think 2 weeks would be plenty of time to explore the questions that we brought up. And then in 2 weeks' time, and I'm hoping that wouldn't, like Mr. Owais, is that how you pronounce it? Yeah, I'm hoping that wouldn't, that the clock isn't ticking or the interest isn't piling up. But in the interest of all that's going on today, if this is how it's done, and I'm new to these types of things, I'd move that we table it for 2 weeks. This very question for 2 weeks.
I've got a motion to table by Jacobson. Do I have a second?
Second.
Got a second by
Mayor, if I may, I'm gonna put a competing motion to have the first reading. So I'll make a motion for approval.
Okay, so we've got a motion by Jacobson to table. We've got a motion by Gandhi to approve the first reading. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, and Mayor, I'll just make a comment. You can't take Amesh's motion until we dispense with the motion that's on the table, which is to table this item. So we need to dispense with that before we can deal with the second motion.
Thomas?
That's correct. In fact,
Okay.
we need a second to the second motion.
Okay, so we've got, and Steve, thank you for that. Thomas Harris, the city secretary, confirmed that. So we're going to we've got a motion by Jacobson, second by McCutcheon to table. We're going to take that vote, and if that vote passes, then we won't take up the second motion.
That's correct. And to clarify, Mayor, the motion is to table to time certain. I believe it was 2 weeks. Is that correct?
That's what I understood. It was a motion, and that's a good point, Thomas. It is a motion to table for 2 weeks.
Okay. And can we do a roll call vote, Mayor?
Mr. Mayor, could I make just one comment?
Go ahead,
relative
Himesh.
to Why I'm suggesting that? If we have concerns, the council can still deny the second reading, which would effectively kill the
initial reading
movement of this, right, of this project or this case. So if you have concerns, staff will still have time to address those before the second reading. If you table it now, you're putting off the 2 readings that are going to be required for another month. So that's why I'm suggesting going forward with the first reading with whatever homework needs to get done and then bring it back for a second reading. It'll still have the net effect of, if you're still not in favor of moving forward, you could still vote on it at the second reading and it'll still have the same result that you'd have right now.
The second reading cannot be until the 3rd Tuesday, because this is the first Tuesday. So you have the effect of a 2-week delay even on the second reading.
May I ask a procedural question, please? If we go ahead with the first reading and then we kill it on the second reading, it's dead, right?
That's correct.
Yes.
Okay. But if, now that we've all had a chance to hear everything, if we table it for 2 weeks and there's a lot of curing done, but maybe there's still some questions, it won't be dead. Next 2 weeks from now, if we approve this, if we vote on this now, it's dead or alive, right? If we table it for 2 weeks, then it lives to fight another day, and it gives time to the applicants to cure, right? To cure some of the questions. So my concern is that I think it's a very worthwhile project, very much so. I just don't want it to die on the second reading if everything is not specifically cured right then. That's why I'm trying to keep it alive with the possibility of curing. That's why I moved that we table it for 2 weeks.
Thomas, is there a requirement to bring it back for a second reading within a certain amount of time?
I do not believe so.
So the question and Meredith is saying no. Meredith, talk to me.
We can always postpone the second reading at the consent of the applicant. So we could do first reading and then bring it back in July if the applicant agrees.
Okay. So we can achieve the same result, Stuart, with the motion by Gandhi. Now we have to vote the table, which is even on the second reading, it can be delayed on the second reading can be delayed on a request from council, actually from city manager and the mayor.
Okay, in that case, is it possible for me to withdraw my motion at this point?
Your motion was?
His motion was to table for 2 weeks.
The second would have to be
The second
withdrawn
would have to be
first.
withdrawn as well.
Then you could take your motion back.
His
second would have to be withdrawn as well.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Okay, so Stuart, you would have to withdraw your motion. Carol would have to withdraw her second, and then we'd have to move to the motion that Gandhi has after that.
Okay, upon the further clarification about our ability to push the second consideration down the line if we need to, I would go ahead and withdraw my motion.
Carol?
I'll withdraw my second.
Okay, so we've withdrawn the motion to table for 2 weeks, the motion and the second. That leaves the motion for Gandhi, which is to move forward with the first consideration.
And I'll second that, please.
Jacobson will second it.
Eric, can I make a comment
Yes, sir.
before we vote? I just would request that Don and Mukhtar, you guys come back with satisfying all the comments that we heard, or else I don't think it's going to move forward. So whether that's lessening the number of units that you have there and take a financial hit, or build it differently, I'm going to make sure, I'm looking for you to satisfy the citizens' concern there. And I just wanted to put that out there.
I've got a motion by Gandhi. I've got a second by Jacobson. Any other discussion? Your vote at this time, please. And that motion passes 5-2, 5-4, 2 against. Thank you, council members. Doug, I think, to the applicants, that being Don, Mukhtar, I think you guys have, you've heard the comments by council, a little bit of work to do, so we'll look forward to getting it, hearing how you address those concerns.
Yes, sir. We'll work with the applicant to see what they're able to do on that. Thanks, sir.
Thank you, Doug. Item number 5, City Council City Manager Reports. 5A, City Council Member Reports. Jennifer, we're going to start with you.
Can't hear you.
Jennifer, you're on mute. Hold on. Thomas is going to get you off. There you go. Now you're on.
As we discussed in our visioning retreat, was to get more involved in our school systems. And so we had our second bond committee meeting for Lamar CISD, and we are plowing through it. That is all.
Let's go to Porter. Steve.
No report, Mayor.
Stewart.
Mayor, Councilmember Kamali and I attended 2 events together, and I want to talk about one, and I'll leave the other one for him. A couple Fridays ago, the Indo-American Forum of Fort Bend donated 6,000 surgical masks for our first responders, and Nishad and I were there to receive the gift on behalf of the city, and we were very grateful.
Thank you, Stewart. Nishad.
Yep. The Ismaili Jamaat Khan Center on First Colony Boulevard had a food drive 2 Saturdays ago, and they were able to fill 2 large trucks full of water, food, and hygiene supplies that benefited FBISD and the pantries here in Fort Bend County. Everything stayed here. That's it, Mayor.
Thank you, Nishad. Himesh.
No report, Mayor.
Carol.
Yes, during the stay-at-home orders, I have gotten an unprecedented amount of communication from residents about everything under the sun, it seems like. So I've been keeping busy responding to constituents. That's it.
Okay. I'm going to take my time tonight. I'd like to thank the Sugar Land residents. As everybody knows, we opened restaurants to 25% of capacity this past Friday. That was under the governor's order. Our ability to be able to do that was due to the response of our community, the individuals in our community complying with the order that was out there. We now have heard from the governor today that this Friday, hair and nail salons will open also. And then on May 18th, we expect, it's not a guarantee, but we expect to go to 50% capacity in restaurants. And I did not hear today about gyms and some others. But I'd like to thank the governor for his leadership. We've been working with Senator Colkhorst. I'd like to thank Carrie Schmidt publicly. She did a yeoman's job of putting together, working with some of her constituents to come up with safe practices. our own restaurant owners. We had them weigh in on it. Don, I know you were part of that. We had the GHBA, Greater Houston Builders Association, Houston Association of Realtors. That said, the package we submitted to the governor and to Senator Colhurst had what I've been told is considerable input in getting him to allow us to open last Friday. It's critical that we get our economy back up and humming. That does not replace the fact that we need to protect the most vulnerable in our community, and we need to continue to social distance and follow all the orders that are in place up until such time as those orders have been removed. So thanks to the people of Sugar Land. Mike, thanks to you and your team for for the city, did a yeoman's job and continues to do a yeoman's job during this unprecedented pandemic. Item number B, City Manager Report. Mike.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd just like to remind our residents that we're in the middle of Hurricane Preparedness Week. Hurricane season starts June 1st, ends November 30th. I think our residents have gotten really good at hunkering down and securing supplies. But brush up on your plans for your property, plans for your family. Check out our website for resources on the hurricane preparedness. And as always, we stand ready to respond. Hopefully we'll get a break this hurricane season. But if not, we're ready to respond.
We're ready to go.
Yes, sir.
Thank you all again, and we'll see you on the third Tuesday.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn. Thank you, Carol.